right, we're just about all here. So, at this point, I would like to call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for February 13th, 2017 to order. Could we have the roll, please?
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Ms. Bailey?
Here.
Mr. Strike? Here. Mr. Looney?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays, Mr. Spinelli, and Ms. Barker have been excused. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome, Brian, formally. Nice to have you here. Disclosures, Brandon. Oh, I'm sorry, I got minutes. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes for January 9th? Thank you, Mr. Spring, seconded by Mr. Strike. Any discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are adopted. Back to disclosures, Mr. Walker.
No disclosures.
Danielle?
None.
Brian?
Yes, I have some disclosures. I have abstained from voting on the minutes and will abstain from participating on the consent agenda as I was not seated as commissioner at that time.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to mention that the case, I have to get the case number, for the stormwater chapter 1.
2017-0030.
Exactly. So that my company was involved with some public outreach on that project. I was not involved personally, but they were involved. We do not have a financial benefit from that, but at least just like to disclose that.
I appreciate that. I think given that you were a participant as a designer in this community, frankly, if makes you well suited to sit here on this board, and we appreciate that participation, but I do not find that to be any conflict in any way. Thanks. Mr. Strike? John?
I have none.
And I have none. Next up is case 2017-18, State of Alaska Context-Sensitive Solutions Project for the Seward Highway, O'Malley Road to Diamond Boulevard. This is an information item. It's not a public hearing. Could we have a staff report, please?
Mr. Chair, this is, we don't do a concept report. This is just for the concept report.
So staff has no comment on this?
No comment. This is an information-only item.
Is the petitioner here today?
They are here tonight.
Are there any questions of the petitioner of the concept report? Go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is informational, and once this concept is approved, who approves the concept report? Is it the project manager?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, no one approves the concept report. The next report you'll see is the DCM, and that one the commission will take action on. But tonight it's an informational only, just read through it and know that this project is planned, and those are the broad outlines of the project are contained in the concept report, and it gives the commission an opportunity to ask any preliminary questions they may have, understanding that they're very early in the design process and may not be able to answer more detailed questions because they haven't fully designed it at this point.
Well, let me ask, is then maybe the project manager or the project person come up? Thank you. Does this set the scope of the project, essentially, or is that already set?
Excellent question. So on this project,
could I get you to state your name, for the record, please?
Sean Baskey. I'm a Department of Transportation project manager. And
Spell your last name for us, please.
B as in boy, A-S-K-I.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sean.
So this project ultimately began back in the early 2000s, resulting in the approval of an environmental document in the mid-2000s. So it was advanced in a number of phases. You're going to see the construction of phase 2 or phase 3, depending on how you're looking at it, from Diamond to Dowling this coming summer. So this will be the next phase in that approved environmental document, which ran all the way from Rabbit Creek Road to 36th Avenue. So the environmental document was approved, which approves the baseline scope of the project back in 2007, I believe.
So these elements that you lined out on the concept then follow that.
Correct.
Environmental document.
Correct.
And there's really not much discretion to change unless you want to mess with the environmental document or something.
Right, which is generally
I mean,
not done on a.
I just wanted that for information.
Yeah,
I agree
absolutely.
with the concept of the elements. I think that you've got them pretty well lined up. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any problem with that. I just was curious more than anything.
Any other questions or comments?
Real quick, I'm understanding that this doesn't take place until, construction isn't until 2021. Any other concurrent projects anticipated around that same time? I know that, for example, O'Malley Phase 1 is starting out this summer, so that should be well done by then. Any other concurrent projects that you know now?
So the Muni has a project that'll be doing some work there on Vanguard Drive, 92nd Avenue, that connects up into Abbott Road.
Okay.
And so it's planned to be concurrent, specifically for.
But it'll
this
be
project.
adjacent to the west, or to the east. I
Correct,
believe,
yeah.
Quite a ways. Okay, thank you.
Before I go to Mr. Looney, Ms. Ferguson?
Yes, I just want to clear something up. I think I may have said the commission will next see it at the DCM. I meant to say DSR. I was thinking more about the subject of the work session we just had.
Thank you. Mr. Looney?
Yeah, thanks for presenting there, Sean. I know you don't have all the details yet, but what was the intention as far as the pedestrian and bicycle connectivities along the frontage roads? I know that I guess I've been a little disappointed in the other sections. I think that essentially the pedestrians are really on the shoulder of the road. Is there a separate pathway?
Sure. Well, Jim Potts can join me. He's the design project manager with CH2ML. Name for your.
Jim, POTTS.
If you could grab the mic, you're going to need it on the mic there. Thanks.
Jim Potts, POTTS, CH2M project manager. Yeah, the original or the prior sections, do include accommodations for pedestrians and bicycles. They're not separated, but there are, on-street accommodations for bicycles and sidewalks for peds. And it also included, the Dowling to Tudor segment included the grade separation at Campbell Creek to, obviously grade separate that segment. So I guess I wouldn't agree that we're not accommodating peds. We're not accommodating them on a, separated facility, but, we are accommodating them.
Ultimately, the question comes down to right away on a number of those segments, and having separated facilities would have required us to acquire strips along the entire frontage road, is my general understanding of the limited right-of-way issues.
Okay.
I mean, we already are acquiring strips along that whole segment and a separated pathway on the east side, as we have communicated all along, would probably put a lot of those businesses out of business from a compliance standpoint.
Okay. I guess we'll just have to follow it as you get more details.
Thank you, Brian. Greg, are you back in the queue? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is a follow-up to this last question, but great job getting the traffic moved off of Diamond southbound. And I've noticed that the traffic merging as it goes in there is significantly higher. I mean, meaning the speeds are higher and it's quicker. And add that to the 92nd Avenue new corridor. But it brings another problem in that we've had a problem for probably the last 10 years, and that's the kids that are crossing the highway continually going over to the trailer park area and coming in, and there's a little mini corridor rushing across the highway. I'm just waiting for this spring, because now the traffic, you don't see it. That traffic now is merging on probably 20 miles an hour quicker. It's going to catch somebody.
Absolutely. The Department of Transportation has, huge concerns in the area as well. Every time that somebody snips the fence, our maintenance crews are out there fixing it. And so what recently happened was our traffic engineer, the Central Region Traffic Engineer, Scott Thomas, nominated a highway safety improvement program project that'll improve the fencing there, as long as well on Glen Highway and a number of the other areas that we've got similar concerns. So we're trying to address it with an interim project here shortly. I believe it might even be this coming summer or the next summer after that. But then that would be replaced by our project. 92nd Avenue would be an undercrossing theoretically through that area, which would provide a pedestrian undercrossing that hopefully people would not, cross the highway right adjacent to that.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. I see no other questions, but thank you for your time here this evening. Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
Next up is the consent agenda. There's one resolution, Resolution 2017-4, related to the changes to Title 21 Farmers Market in greenhouses, I think, which we basically postponed, that second section. Mr. Strike.
That was my question, that there be no ambiguity on the piece that we postponed indefinitely. And I note that in the resolution, there is no reference, but didn't want something, any caveat, whatever. And I see a quizzical look from Mr. Spring. This was the part where we dismissed the 15-foot height limitations and tabled that. So I didn't want any cross-reference in the resolution to anything related to that.
I don't believe it is it?
I did not.
We're good with the resolution. Okay, so motion to approve resolution, Mr. Spring, and seconded by Ms. Bailey. Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Strike, any objection to approving the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. There are two additional cases that are non-public hearing items. The first item is case 2017-11, a time extension request for an additional 7 years for conditional use permit for natural resource extraction, generally located north of East 92nd Avenue, east of C Street, south of West 88th, and west of A Street. Could we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a simple time extension. None of the reviewing agencies have objected to the time extension. The current conditions are substantially the same as when original conditional use was approved. There have been no known violations, noise violations, environmental problems, on-site or off-site. The petitioner appears to be in compliance with all the conditions of approval for the operation. The department's recommending approval. The applicant is out of town for this meeting, but has sent his son as a representative. But I don't think he's sort of expert in the particular case. I just wanted to inform the commission. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Strike.
You did note that, and this is a question back to the staff, and that all the dust control plans and the sweat plans, everything had been adhered to and been provided?
That's correct.
The original plan, I believe, was for 5.5 years. Now this one is a request for an extension now for 7 years?
That's correct. The property's been subdivided, and it's taken longer to complete the project. It was foreseen that it would probably take longer. The petitioner expressed that they thought they could complete it within 5 years, but that if another year were needed, then he did not want to have to return to the commission.
Is 7 years a norm?
No.
That we would see? What would be a normal time extension?
5 year.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Any other questions or staff? Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Looney.
This extension was really initiated back in 2011, when the original, I guess, clearing was planned for. If this was a brand new case and just walked in the door today, would there be many more restrictions on the lot or on the development than we're looking at in the packet right now?
Through the chair, Mr. Looney, that's really an excellent question. No, this has the sort of the modern conditions of approval of a natural resource extraction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Does anyone wish to hear from the petitioner? Mr. Spring, go ahead.
Yes, I just have one question for the petitioner.
Please, if you could state your name for the record.
My name's Kirk Curry.
Can you spell that for me?
Last name's Curry, C-U-R-R-E-Y. First name Kirk, K-I-R-K.
Thank you.
Chad Hartman.
Thanks.
Yes, through the chair. I believe I read in the staff report that the reason that natural resource extraction couldn't be completed was because the road to the last parcel was delayed or something like that. Can you explain that? I didn't quite understand what that problem involved.
Can you repeat that, please?
Well, I'm just paraphrasing, that we're not able to complete the road to the last parcel in order to extract peat. And that seems to be the rationale for the extension, and so I was wondering if you could explain that.
It's access to the east of, what's the cul-de-sac? To the north. A Street. A Street, yeah, the A Street cul-de-sac from north to south. And then he needs to go west towards C Street to access the rest of the property.
So how did that delay the project? It seemed as if that was the reason why it was delayed, but
I don't believe that I believe it was the rest of the project, the duration of the time it took for completion of to get to where they are at today. Is that fair, Chad?
oh, so in other words, you didn't extract as much as you thought you would in the original
Correct.
application. This doesn't have anything to do with the road or the I guess, right? It's just, yeah, typical natural
Right.
resource extraction problem, not enough demand or whatever, and didn't extract as much as you thought you would.
Correct.
Okay.
Thanks. Mr. Strike, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. As a matter of disclosure, I wasn't sure which case Mr. Curry might be here for, and I just want to disclose he is my next door neighbor. No financial involvement, but we all know somebody.
I
I
agree.
just happen to know this guy. So as a point of disclosure.
Very good. You know, that can go either way, by the way.
Yeah.
Anybody else with questions for the petitioner? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
What's the wish of the body?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Strike.
In the matter of case 2011 the new case 2017-0011, time extension to a conditional use for natural resource, move for approval for that extension following the same guidelines as provided in that original case that was provided in 2011.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Looney. Any discussion? Any objection to approving the time extension? Hearing none, that time extension is approved. Thank you. Next up, the other non-public hearing item is Municipality of Anchorage Long-Range Planning Review and Recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Assembly of the Anchorage School District 6-year Capital Improvement Plan. Could we have a staff report on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, and welcome aboard to our new Commissioner, Mr. Looney. You have an amended or updated memo in your packet. I believe it was laid on the table tonight. And I just wanted to bring your attention, there's just a couple of updates to that memo. Those are both on page 2. The third paragraph, it just says that the national standard recommends investing the 7%. And then in the fifth paragraph, we replace the word deferred maintenance with deferred sustainment. And those are edits that were requested by the school district. So the Anchorage School District CIP is presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission for your review and comment each year. The Planning and Zoning Commission then makes a recommendation of approval to the Anchorage Assembly. The Anchorage School Board directed this year's CIP development to focus on 3 elements, and that was a resolution that was passed by the school board on March 7, 2016. And what they recommended with this year's CIP is take care of what we have, complete a data-based assessment for project ranking, and perform an open and transparent study of school capacity. ASD's staff presented at a planning and zoning work session on January 9th, wherein staff gave an overview of the CIP development and the inputs from these 3 focus areas. Some possible findings are included in the staff memo, and the Planning and Zoning Commission will need to make a motion to recommend approval of the CIP to the Assembly. And those proposed or suggested findings are on page 3 of your staff memo. And Mike Nero's here tonight if you have any questions for him.
Thank you. Any questions of staff or the petitioner? Mr. Spring.
I think I'll wait till the petitioner. Thank you.
Would you like to call him up?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Mike, do you want to come up?
Good evening. Mike Nero, N-E-R-O, and I am the district's Senior Director of Capital Planning and Construction. Be happy to answer any of your questions.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. We had a work session before on this last meeting, so for the people who are in here, we've gotten a lot of good information from them. So I just got a couple other additional questions, though. And I'd like you to discuss a little bit. I was reading the results of the Citizen Advisory Committee. I forget, you have 2 separate ones, one with the school district and one with the citizens, right? It's the Citizen Advisory Committee issued a report recommending approval of this, which I thought was very helpful to me. But they discussed a little bit about the Eagle River situation and the possibilities of, which I think would be fairly radical, but combining some of the schools. It looked like, my little brief review, that the capacity is sufficient to handle and basically mothball Greening Junior High School, right? And maybe it would require some major boundary changes, I think. I didn't see that in recommended in yours, but do you have a response to that committee report? I think they made a suggestion that you should consider that.
Through the chair, the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, they are members of the community that have participated in the capital planning process, some with many, many years of experience working with the school district. We did get through a district-wide capacity study, which resulted in looking across the district, reevaluating our methodology and how we determine program capacity. And through those efforts, we published those program capacity results in our capital improvement plan. At the time, the district looked across and considered that capacity. One of those initiatives that we see happening right now and will take effect before we start the next school year is the Mount I closure on the installation, and that program is being relocated into 4 neighborhood schools. So in essence, we just decreased our school capacity by one school on the installation. Additionally, we also looked at rezoning, which again will take place in the next school year, and that is with the Ursa Major and Ursa Minor on the J. Bear Richardson side of the installation, with full support from the J. Bear community and the installation commander and the families. We had several town hall meetings, and that is just a rezoning there to balance the capacities. One school was well over 100%, while the other school was sitting at about 70-some%. So we took initiatives there to balance those capacities. There's other initiatives. The council also recommended looking at Whaley as another opportunity to either invest in that school based on its geographical location, or look across the district to find out if there are other ideal, kind of like the Whaley or the Mount I situation. So with that being said, at this point in time, the we're looking at the, the sustainment type initiatives. We're not renewing big school renewals in this environment. And the schools that we are proposing on the 2017 bond proposal are those schools that are not under the consideration of being affected by the capacity situation. But I can just assure you that as the planning efforts continue, they never end, that the school district looks and evaluates those situations. And the incentive there is to heighten and build programs to increase those populations across the district.
Thank you for the explanation. I think that helps. And I wasn't personally in favor of that idea. It seems like, this is not a question, I guess, but that communities need their junior high schools, and you eliminate one or combine it with high school is probably going to be very difficult to integrate the younger kids with the older kids. I thought that was pretty generally understood. That wasn't a good idea from a teaching point of view, but it's a big difference in age there. So, but my opinion, I guess. Also, I want to maybe I'll put this on the record later, but I want you to explain a little bit why you support keeping Central Middle School open. That was an issue I know that you've been working out for quite a while, and you talked to the planning department about it, and I think they told you rightly that there's a potential, at least in the land use plan that they're bringing forward, to increase the actual density or the number of people and students that live there. And in fact, we read about Cook Inlet putting in a new apartment building in downtown, which would be in that district, although it seems like it would be mostly single persons or smaller families. But nevertheless, am I on the track there? Is that why you're recommending that you keep it open because of that?
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct, and I would draw your attention to the planning memorandum from the municipality planning division that we included in our CIP this year, which we had one last year, but it's a little bit more developed this year as far as projecting housing densities in the certain areas of across the Anchorage Bowl, and that is with the draw and the plan to develop and draw more population into the midtown and downtown areas. That is one of the reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. I appreciate the work session, the session we had before, and you were able to go through the change in the methodology that was now being used. And granted, if the old methodology isn't working, a change has to take place. Understand that whenever a change in methodology takes place, a flag goes up and said, what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to make the results look like the plan, or the plan look like the results? And chicken and the egg, what are we trying to force fit something to get a desired picture? So I guess as a statement, I guess we will see in the next 2 or 3 years as these forecast, this methodology translates into actual numbers. But one of the items that we had been looking for in the last probably 2-3 years of these types of presentation is the actual to forecast, so that we can see how those forecasts are transpiring, not just see the end result. So to see what was forecasted 3 years ago and what actually happened last year, to see these trends and see what's happening. Because there is a bit of optimism I'm reading into this plan, and that I believe the plan is a little bit overly optimistic. Based on the current trends, there's some strong assumptions. Now granted, we're both grasping at straws here, and we will have to wait and see what happens and who's right in 2 or 3 years. But I think it's important to be, and I mentioned this earlier, be prepared to be able, as Mr. Spring had indicated, what's the backup plan? What's the contingency plan? I would be preparing that now. Thank you.
And through the chair, I would just take a moment to great feedback, comments as far as actually publicizing in our CIP how the projected enrollments have come to fruition and how they're actually realized compared to what was projected in before. I can tell you, though, the new method that we are using, with the accounts of using the cohort method of survival, kids moving on, and then incorporating the PFD data geographically by school zone, it has brought a level of accuracy that we haven't seen in the past for the Anchorage School District. So I would say our projections, and they are projected to be flat, slightly declining, so it's not an optimistic look. And there is no additions and there is no new schools projected to be built on the 6-year plan to say otherwise. So it's pretty much a straightforward, sustainment type of 6-year plan until we get out to about years 5 and 6 when we hope and anticipate that the state debt reimbursement comes back, so we can start doing those modernizations that those 30 to 50-year-old facilities really need.
I don't disagree, but I can tell you I've had a number of conversations with parents with small children. They're waiting until June to move out.
Debbie Downer over there. All right, Mr. Spring, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more question, of course. I like the PFD. I thought that was a very good idea. The fact that I think the Alaska Department of Labor uses that as one of the bases for estimating population along with the cohort survival. But I looked at all the individual schools to see what the increase was and if there's any outliers, and I found far fewer this year than I did in the past, which leads me to believe it improved it, like you said. I did find one, however, and just for your information, it seemed like 2 schools in Mountain View, Tyson and Mountain View Elementary, should have about the same level of student enrollment increases over the 5 years. And it actually didn't turn out that way, because Tyson is expected to grow by 93 and Mountain View's only grows by 16. That seems to make, I'm not saying that's wrong necessarily, but it might kind of raises a red flag a little bit, and it might be useful to evaluate the methodology next year based on the actual enrollment. I'm sure you do that anyway, and maybe see if there's any tweaking to be done, or if there was any flaw in the methodology, because that kind of leads me to believe, maybe it's not 100%, you're not getting 100% information from PFD or something, threw it off, because I don't see any reason why there should be any changes in those two. It's pretty much the same neighborhood.
Through the chair, if I may offer, Tyson is one of the schools that are picking up the Mount I children, so that will affect their capacity and their projected capacity.
Okay. Well, see, there's stuff I don't read in there, I guess. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Thank you, Mr. Nero. Any other questions for Mr. Nero? Any questions at all? Thank you again. What's the will of the body? Mr. Spring.
Yes, I move to recommend approval of the 2017 to 2023 Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Bailey. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes. As far as findings are concerned, I would like to include the findings that are written, conveniently written for us by staff, which include the Anchorage School District CIP will have greater reliability when determining distribution of students by using inputs from the Anchorage Bowl Land Use Plan project. To commend the Anchorage School District management for incorporating a new method of calculating demographics and enrollment that includes PFD applications, which was found to reduce the long-term error rate by 80%. 3, the Anchorage School District CIP and bond request take in consideration the current financial status of the state of Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage. And I would add one more, which is
go ahead.
Agree with the conclusion of the Anchorage School District to retain the use of Central Junior High School, at least for the duration of the 6-year capital improvement program.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Ms. Bailey.
I just want to add on to the third finding that Commissioner Spring mentioned. I think that this plan really did look at that the state is under a little bit of is under a financial strain, and was smart about really focusing on only critically needed infrastructure changes. However, I just think it's important to note that that's going to clog the pipeline down the road, and I don't think your job is going to be easy moving forward, and I think you did a very good job with this. However, I am worried about Anchorage the next time around when we have less room as we keep pushing things down.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Any other findings?
No.
Anyone else? Any objection to approving the recommendation to the Anchorage Assembly? Hearing none, that recommendation is approved. Thank you, Ms. Nero. Next up is our first public hearing, case 2017-12, conditional use permit for natural resource extraction on Eklutna Tract 37, generally located 1.5 miles west of the North Eagle River exit off the Glen Highway. Can we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The request is for a conditional use to allow natural resource extraction in Chugiak. The petitioner is requesting a conditional use permit for 30 years with a non-public time extension every 5 years. The operations on Eklutna Tract 37 will include clearing and grubbing, stripping of topsoil and overburden, extraction, processing, rock crushing, stockpiling, shipping, and reclamation. Staff learned late in the review process that an asphalt batching plant is also proposed. The proposed area of disturbance is 155 acres. The expected truck volumes to and from Tract 37 will be a total number of 600 trucks per day. The site includes wetlands, designation Class A wetlands. Access to the site is via Eklutna Park Drive, a municipal road, and is designated a collector on the OS&HP. The Powder Ridge subdivision also uses Eklutna Park Drive for access. DOT has requested a limited TIA analysis. The reclamation for all disturbed areas will consist of contouring and stabilization in a manner consistent with the intended final use of the land and will be left with a gravel floor. Access to the site is through a gated entrance at the end of Eklutna Park Drive. The access description does not take into consideration the ability of public access from anywhere but Eklutna Park Drive. The public could reach the site on ATV vehicles or snow machines from other sides of the site. The petitioner is working with the Alaska Railroad to develop a bridge to access over the railroad tracks to access Tract 37 from Site 4. The bridge will facilitate shipping and increase the safety of the operations. Site development, including construction of the bridge, is anticipated to be complete in 2017. I have one correction to make to one of the conditions, and that concerns condition number 10. I'd like to delete the second sentence, which reads, prior to February 13th, 2022, the petitioner shall request a non-public hearing, and I would like to add a proposed add to that condition. The language reads, if during the period of approval the planning department determines that the petitioner is in violation of the conditions of approval or has created environmental problems, either on-site or off-site, then the petitioner shall return to the commission for a public hearing. I distributed a couple examples of that to the commissioners just to make it a little bit easier to read off if there's agreement. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Questions for staff? Go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, several questions through the chair. What is a limited TIA?
I think they were just looking for something. Their concern is with the Glen Highway freeway ramps during peak hours. I think their comments in the packet explain kind of the information they are looking for.
So it's just they know what the issue is, and they just want to see what the effect would be. So what happens? We know that there's already a TIA on that interchange from the Powder Reserve. So
yeah,
how do you decide who pays for that interchange improvement? It's just a light issue, I believe, right?
Yeah,
signal issue.
Yeah, it could be that, but it's it's as described by DOT in their comments. I don't have any more information than that.
Okay, that's fine. Follow-up question or another question. So how will the planning department in your revised condition number 10 know that there's a violation of the conditions?
It would most likely be complaint-driven. We'll hear from Department of Health and Human Services. They're getting complaints either with noise or dust, or we may hear that there are issues concerning the wetlands, encroachment, or problems with that. So it's really, we'll just wait to hear any complaints that we may receive.
And if you can't resolve it, then it would come to us somehow.
Yes.
For rewriting the condition. And just one more, please, if I might. There's a resolution you put in the packet, 2007-022, and I appreciate that being put in there, but I don't know what that applies to, what parcel that involves. I'm assuming it's a parcel that is accessing the Powder Reserve. Is it Powder Reserve Road?
Yes, let me, Mr. Spring, locate that.
It's on, let's see what page it's on. Well, the reason I brought it up is because there's some of the conditions there are different from the conditions that you have in, that you want to apply to this project. And if I'm right, then I believe it's probably the parcel on the other side of the railroad.
Yeah, it is that side. It does refer to that side.
Yeah, and on that condition number 16 in that resolution, it talks about truck operation and treatment of the Eklutna, or the road. Let's see. Can you tell me what page that resolution is on?
It's on 19.
19. So, yes, thank you very much. The condition that is in that resolution says, provide a transportation operations management plan to the planning department and traffic department on an annual basis, the intent of which is to deal with impacts caused by truck traffic on Eklutna Parkway, aka Eklutna Park Drive. No parking, idling, and no jake braking, engine compression braking operations are allowed on Eklutna Parkway. Adequate space should be provided within the site for vehicle storage. I don't understand that. A dust surfactant product, did I pronounce that right? For example, Durasoil shall be applied to Eklutna Parkway as needed. So that's one condition, and the other parcel conditional use that you didn't include here. So I'm just wondering why that wasn't included.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I did send that information up to the traffic department just to let them know, and I didn't get any response back from them. But nevertheless, should the commission want to add that information to the current project, staff would have no objection.
Okay. I'm sure the petitioner representative will comment on that, but if not, it may be redundant because I believe the two parcels are owned by the same entity, so it may not, be important. I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you. On staff's recommendations on number 14, I've always got a concern when we tell a contractor how to do his job. Does the staff have any issue if on the second sentence we just remove the word hand and just state felling of trees shall be accomplished near the buffer so as not to disturb the root zone of the trees?
Through the chair. Oh, go on.
There's any number of different means and methods that they can incorporate to accomplish the same.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, we held a post-application meeting with the petitioner, and we discussed this, and they said that they plan to carry out the clearing in this fashion. So I just took the words that they had proposed, meaning they were going to tag the trees, and was going to do hand felling of the trees that were near the buffer so they wouldn't disturb the root zone.
But obviously our concern is not disturbing the root zone, so rather than get into means and methods, you wouldn't have any issue with removing the word hand. They still may opt that way, but I don't like putting means and methods from the commission to the petitioners.
What other means or methods were you considering that would safeguard the root zone?
There's mastication, there's certain types of hydroaxes and so forth. There's felibunchers. There's different ways to snip the trees off and not disturb the root structure.
Okay, the only other thing is that sometimes with these machines, they tend to go beyond the buffer, and then that does become a problem because they're not fencing it in this case, putting up orange fence or anything like that. All they're doing is tagging the tree sort of every 50 feet.
But again,
that's my only reservation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff before we go to public hearing? Okay, at this point, I'll read the procedure by which the public may speak at the public hearing. After the staff presentation is completed, I will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedures. Petitioners, including all his or her representatives, 10 minutes. And part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups such as community councils and PTA, 5 minutes, and individuals 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may also testify once on any issue. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. So at this point, we'll open the public hearing if the petitioner would like to come forward.
My name is Michelle Ritter with Dow. With me this evening is Steve Conley and Nick Francis with Eklutna. I want to thank staff for hosting a post-application meeting with us and giving us the opportunity to go over a few of the conditions of approval. I do want to just share some of the clarifications with you. In the staff report and several pages, it states that there will be 600 trucks will be coming on site per day. First of all, that should read 300 trucks, 600 truck trips. So one trip is an in and out situation. Please also keep in mind that 300 trips is the maximum that the site can handle. So given the hours of operation and the time that it takes to get through the scale house in a booming economy, if there's just construction going everywhere, that's the maximum that could enter that site. Realistically, what's happening, we know this because of their operations up by Eklutna Village at Site 1. There's about 150 trucks that enter the site per day. We just wanted to get 300 for those times of big-time construction and to make sure that we were analyzing the impacts from a worst case or maximum case scenario. Also, there's comments from DHHS on the noise and air quality. DHHS did attend the post-application meeting with us. And so we were able to show them the grading of the site, which slopes away from the residential neighborhoods. We also have about just shy of 5,000 foot separation to the nearest residence. We have noise studies on similar equipment that show in a less distance that we can withhold the noise threshold. So we will be working with them to get all the information that they requested and are confident that we can do that. As far as the dust mitigation plan, that will be addressed in the multi-sector general permit that's required, and DHHS was fine with just accepting the approved MGSP to satisfy that. There's also an indication that work depths were not provided and that a time schedule was not as well. That information actually was provided. It's in Appendix C, page 69 of your staff report. Staff did clarify during our post-application meeting that they'd like us to include the topsoil depth in our work depths, which we will update our plan to include. As Sharon mentioned, that we do have a large site, so people are, I guess they couldn't access it through four-wheelers and snow machines. It's 550 acres. We're going to be working in about 150 acres of that. The entire site is signed that it's a Eklutna property, it's private property. Around the area that will be mining, not only does Alaska Railroad personnel patrol that area, but Eklutna Inc. does as well. They have a very vested interest to make sure that there's not trespass and that their safety is taken into consideration. It also, the staff report also indicated that our description of natural resource extraction did not include how much overburden would be removed from the site. We did not include this information because the overburden isn't being removed from the site. It will either be stockpiled, as indicated on the site plan, for future reclamation. So when we go to stabilize the slopes, we'll have soil on site to use for seeding. Or some of it might be placed over on site 4. But they won't be trucking it through the main roads, but we're happy to include that into the rest of our information. We do consider Appendix B on page 67, the reclamation plan. It does show what the finished elevations will be, how the slopes will be stabilized, as well as how the gravel floor will be left. But we will augment that with a detailed planting schedule that shows what seed mix we're going to use and how much and on what specific slope. And I just want to reiterate that prior to any future development, the site will need to be rezoned and likely replatted, so that will require further review by MOA Planning and the Planning and Zoning Commission. We did go through both the DOT's comments as well as Mr. McNamara's. And just want to point out that when we did the analysis for this report, we did take into consideration that there's a bigger accountability for trucks versus cars because trucks are longer, so they take up more of a queuing moment. So that was adjusted. We had not looked at the interchange impacts, but we did a very loose, very conservative but quick analysis, and we do not believe that there is going to be impacts. There's already a failure happening. We don't believe that this will increase it by a 10% delay. However, if a TIA does show that it is, then we can adjust either with somehow hours of operation or metering. I think there's ways around that. Commissioner Spring, you asked about if there was an offsite impact, who would pay for that? There's actually an agreement by DOT that states that it's more geared towards, the assumption was that when the next phase of Powder Reserve went in, that's when that would be needed, and it likely will. But there's an agreement that DOT, MOA, and Eklutna will share the cost of those improvements so that there is a mechanism in place. I guess lastly, just want to point out that we did meet with the Eagle River Community Council, so that's the community council that this project is in. Even though this is going under old Title 21, we did follow the noticing procedures of new Title 21, so we gave 21 days advance notice, sent out the mailing postcards. We had about 8 neighbors who attended. They did have questions about the operations, noise, truck trips, hours of operation, pretty standard questions, but they generally were not concerned by the impacts. We've read the conditions of approval. We're okay with 10 as modified. We're okay if the commission wants to remove hand felling. We're also okay with keeping condition 14 as it is. I also just want to clarify that the asphalt batch was not intentionally not included explicitly, but it's going to be portable, and it'll only be on site with specific jobs if it's required by DOT. It will still require the necessary DEC permit and continually monitoring to make sure there's no emissions. And just to speak to the condition 16 on resolution 2007-022, that is for Site 4, which is the adjacent gravel operation. They are under common ownership, and so that condition would be redundant. Again, it's happening. We're fine to have it on this one, but it is already happening as part of the other condition of approval. With that, I'd like to save the rest of my time for rebuttal.
Thank you, Ms. Ritter. You have about 2 minutes and 16 seconds for rebuttal. There's a question for you from Mr. Strike. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, some clarity on the hours of operation. I note here that their petitioner is requesting 24-hour trucking operations.
Yes.
And is it planned to use Eklutna Park Drive?
Yes. And that would be for DOT projects only. It wouldn't be for commercial sales. So they would be, because of a lot of the DOT projects happening at night, it would give them the opportunity to have a gravel operation. So they'd be only picking up stockpiled material. So there'd be no excavation during that time. And that's actually an approved use at Eklutna Site 1, which is adjacent to the native village of Eklutna. And how that's handled is that prior to any 24-hour occurrences, they notify the neighbors. I think it's 3 days in advance. They put mailers on the doors. They run an ad in the Navigator. And there's a few other things that they do to let people know that they will be operating 24 hours.
And you had limited comments and feedback from the neighbors on that?
Correct.
Are those, and that is all fully developed lots in there right now on that area?
Are you talking about Site 4 or Track 37?
I'm talking about the orange, where it says private, where it's highlighted in orange. So on Eklutna Park Drive, which would be the impacted street for up here, yes. All of those lots are developed?
All of the ones on the west side are developed. East side has not been yet.
So half the property is not developed yet?
Correct.
So we would be looking at making a determination here for a 30-year permit with 5-year recurring reviews into a subdivision that's not yet developed. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I just want to,
One thing that, one correction is that improvement.
Could you state your name for the record?
Nick Francis with Eklutna. The improvement to take a step back to the interchange actually wouldn't be after the next phase, but to a 50% capacity, so multiple phases, correct?
correct.
That's
Right.
And then also, as far as these subsequent phases of construction, what we did with Powder View is we own these lots and we'll be selling them, and we include in the PSAs language that buyer acknowledges the fact that we will be driving those trucks through there. So before they buy it, they're going to buy off on it.
And these trucks are coming in empty, going out full, and the anticipated market for without going into your business plan, I'm just wondering, is it going north or south on the highway?
Well, to answer your first question, they're not always coming in empty because they might be bringing fill in.
Right.
Site 4 takes fill, so it allows for.
Sure.
So this is Track 4. This is Track 37. So this actually allows for a round-robin operation, so they can bring in the fill, pick up gravel and leave. To answer the question whether they're heading north or south, it depends on where the project is.
Is this, and I know Eklutna has done a great job on its previous gravel pit further north on the highway, so you anticipate operating this in a similar fashion?
We are, it won't be exactly the same way as we had operated both Birchwood and the Eklutna pit. Both of those we had partnered with contractors for the entire process of operations. We're looking at potentially partnering with a contractor in the beginning and then eventually phasing out and taking over operations, but keeping all the options open. So that would be the only other departure. We were involved in the other operations, but primarily it was done by a contractor that we had selected.
And I believe at your old, at the old pit on the Eklutna, you had scales and so forth, which I applaud because many times that it's closed and there was an inspection process that took place on the trucks coming out because I've been sprayed by rocks many times once we hit the road, but that's another issue. And it's just going north where there are no scales whatsoever, so we don't have the, you can take care of the weight issue. I guess my biggest concern is how the neighborhood handles that, and I understand, hey, you sign this, you sign on the dotted line, you bought a lot, and hey, you agree that, you know, you agreed to 24-hour operation of trucks coming in and out during certain peak periods of time.
I think you're right on, that at the end of the day, you sign those documents, and sometimes people miss that, but at the end of the day, those are our clients, and we're going to want them to be happy. And we still, oftentimes we'll have a member on their boards, and we listen to their complaints. And you brought up the other sites that we've run. I think that's, you know, pertinent in the fact that the Eklutna Village, where several members of our board were on, had to listen, and they were much closer than this, had to listen to the truck traffic. You know, there was an exchange, and we listened to them and made sure, you know, our constituents were happy, and we were able to, you know, have those late hours of hauling, and really we can placate them. It's just a matter of listening to them. I don't foresee us, it may have come across a little harsh before, I don't foresee us listening to or disregarding what they say because they signed something. I mean, these are potential clients.
And I applaud. I mean, given this, if this were a 5-year plan, a 7-year plan, even a 10-year plan, we can tend to hit a lot of those buffers. But you're coming in here proposing here a 30-year plan. That's where I'm having. Have you looked at alternative ingress egress via the road? Is there options other than using Eklutna Park Drive? Maybe not today, but planned out in the future as Track 40 gets further developed?
Well, one of the
Nick, can I get you closer to the mic?
Did you want to, we've already talked about this answer. Do you want me to answer or you? Okay. So with this, right now the only access is this road. And if you look everything that's around, I think the biggest point is the military that's behind it. So that's bordering a lot of it. And then the railroad owns tract 39 here. 38, what's the way to put this? I think if anyone's going to be really proactive of finding additional access to tract 38, which would be the only other adjacent site, it would be us, because we would, if we eventually develop this, it would behoove us to have additional access. But at this point, particularly with this railroad property, having quite a few wetlands in it, it would be, I'm not going to say it's impossible that at some date in 30 years you don't get additional access, but we haven't seen any.
I'm just looking at the map and seeing if there's a way to come north of Eklutna Road, but my reluctance is, you know, again, a 30-year plan. There's a permanency to this. There's further development, I believe, ultimately that was here before the commission about a year ago for the development of additional property, or is this the property that we approved about a year ago?
No, this is the first time you've seen this property.
Okay. No, not the.
You mean Powder Reserve?
Powder Reserve, yes.
Oh, okay.
I think that came before us about a year ago, and these are the lots now that we're seeing that were developed. But that's my reluctance right now is 30 years continually through a subdivision that's expanding.
I do want to add, I think that that's one of the benefits of having the 5-year check-ins, is to kind of reassess the situation and have these discussions on a periodic basis, so that, you know, there's quite a, I think it's almost $3 million to put the bridge in, so there's a large capital expense that the Eklutna has to put into developing the site. So their board and their business plan needs to have some certainty that, you know, if they behave and they run this as they will in a very responsible manner, that they're going to have the ability to use it. And is it going to be 30 years? Maybe not. It could be 20 years. I mean, each phase represents a year, but we also know that we're realistically going into a downtick with construction, so we don't want to just say 20 years and come back and ask for 30, but we will be coming in for the check-ins.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Mr. Spring.
Where the petition site is? Sorry, where the petition site is. That map's confusing.
So this is the petition site here in red. This one.
But my page 13, it shows the section.
There, the staff report has this little thing that's not included in our application. It's owned by Eklutna, but it's not part of this tract.
I'm relieved. Thank you.
Yeah. We wanted to avoid the lake and
Clooney Lake.
Yeah.
I was worried that based on this map that was going to be impacted pretty severely.
No, that was intentional to avoid that.
Thank you. Thank you. Where's the road? Where's the bridge or whatever that goes over the railroad going to access? I mean, at what point do you think there's supposed to be you have to go over the railroad track?
Correct. So are you saying
they
where's
won't let you
the
do it at
location?
Great Crossing.
And it'll probably be, I think it's going to be right about here. Sorry. Just for north of the pond.
Okay.
Unless you have a more.
So we've actually already determined where the bridge is because we had to coordinate with the railroad because they have to look at their line of sight. So there's only a small window.
Gonna need you on the mic when you're talking.
I'm going to see if I can find something in your staff packet that's easier to look at.
But it was right around where Michelle was saying. So it can't be near the.
I need you on the mic. Or
If you look at page 65 of your staff report, we actually indicate on that where the proposed bridge is going to be. I have this in a board, but I don't think you're going to be able to read it any easier.
Other questions?
Thank
Good?
you. Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner before we go to public hearing? No? Okay, like I said, you got, Ms. Ferguson.
Yes, a couple of things. I first just want to clarify that there is a condition, number 10. This approval is valid until February 13, 2027. We wanted to give them a 10-year conditional use permit, which is departure. This will be the first time we've done 10 years. Usually we only allowed, with every other gravel extraction, a 5-year conditional use permit with the understanding if they need additional time, they come back for a time extension. So I just wanted to point that out also. And then I also have a alteration to condition 6 that I should have done. It regards the filling of trucks from the processed material stockpiles, the 24 hours, 7 days a week. I just want to say it should be allowed only for DOT projects. And I should have had there, it's only for DOT projects. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we go to public testimony? Okay, 2 minutes, 16 seconds, Michelle. At this point, I'd like to invite the public forward. If you're wishing to testify, please come on forward. State your name, whether you're a member of a group, for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Kevin McNamara, and I am the chair with Birchwood Community Council. Our council district or area borders this particular site, and certainly I submitted some personal comments, as well as the Birchwood Community Council also submitted some comments. And we feel, initially, notwithstanding the concerns with traffic mitigation, we have no concerns with this project. Eklutna Inc. has been a very viable and welcome community partner, both in our area and most of the areas throughout the Chugach, Eagle River, Birchwood area, and have operated outstandingly over the past. And they do seek public comment and comment feedback from the community councils on a regular basis. I've met several times with them and have certainly no issue with it. Our concern certainly is the volume. They're going to run from early April to late October, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. They will be running peak operations, certainly, 300 trucks, 600 trips per day, 60 per hour. And that'll be slow moving, loaded in some instances, trucks in and out of that site. So it in and of itself is going to slow down traffic migration that currently exists in that area. There certainly was, Dow presented some great figures. They did some studies. The challenge we have with the traffic analysis, impact analysis that currently has been, their reference was done in 2004. And they're just using statistical models to update that to a 2016 and 2018 projection, because 2018 will be when they will start the extraction process. The 17 will probably be taken up with putting the bridge in and getting the access to track 37. The comment in here that the addition of the 300 trucks will only amount to about 20% of the current traffic flow in that area. And if you take the number of trucks compared to the total number of traffic that comes in and out of that from Eklutna Park Drive, Powder Ridge Drive, Vasily Drive, and Terrace Lane, that's probably 20%. But if you look at the graphs that they have presented, the traffic entering and exiting Terrace Lane and Powder Ridge subdivision, either from Powder Ridge Drive or Vasily Drive, virtually changes or doesn't change in either one of their projections. But what does change is traffic straight through in and out of that project. It's a pretty significant increase in traffic flow. And again, what is missing from the traffic analysis in 2004 is any reference to traffic flowing on and off the highway. Terrace Lane, which is one of the sites that they had referenced, is probably less than 100 yards from the Eagle River, the westbound exit for the Glen Highway. There's a tremendous amount of traffic on that highway. There's some contention early on that the 2004 report was done in the off-season and when school was closed, so you didn't get the traffic that would include parents taking children back and forth to the schools, noon hour traffic with students migrating into Eagle River for lunch, and then certainly the evening traffic with parents picking up and other activities at the local schools. So we would request that a new and updated traffic and impact analysis be generated for this project, kind of twofold from our standpoint. Certainly the gravel pit has its own merit in the amount of traffic from there, but also when construction begins on the east side of Eklutna Park Drive, there's a lot of housing going to be put in that area, a lot of land that's going to be developed, and that's going to put a strain on a couple of different areas.
Thank you. So your testimony is to request an up-to-date TIA with those considerations, sir?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions for Mr. McNamara? Go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yes. With respect to dust on the road, the access road is a dirt road, correct, or gravel, or?
That's correct.
Is there people complaining about the dust, or has it been taken care of according to that condition that I read about the Surfac and?
Well, I think Eklutna has taken some, Mr. Spring, some proactive action in reviewing. There's a non-public hearing coming up for their 5-year extension on the their Site 4, which is on the highway side of the railroad tracks, if you will. And there was the only complaint that they had received was in 2008, where trucks were stacking up outside the gate before the opening hour of the gravel pit. And it appears like what they did was they added a second gate further in, so the trucks can enter the first gate right at the end of Eklutna Park Drive, stage inside that. That puts them behind the the housing development that's there. So it gives room for those kinds of things. And so what it does is allows a buffer, I think, as well for dust for when they come up and over the overpass. It certainly will be a dirt road. But I think in that area or that space between the gates, there has been no complaints that I'm aware of for dust, noise, or anything else.
Trying to deal with the braking issues that it tried to address. It said, I'll repeat it if I can. Is your mic on? Sorry. Very sorry. My mic wasn't on. The other parcel that you mentioned on the highway side,
yes,
the condition that required no parking, idling, and no braking are allowed on the Eklutna Parkway. And it also says that they need to provide a transportation operations management plan on an annual basis to deal with the impact of truck traffic on the Eklutna Parkway. Do you think that's necessary, or would that be an issue that the Birchwood Community Council would support?
Yeah, I think they've resolved that by putting in that second gate, that second access gate. So the first gate to enter that the current site, Track 4 or Site 4, is even with the current housing development in there. So if anything was going to stack, it stacked up between there and the highway overpass. They've added that second gate inside that their existing gravel pit. So I think they've accommodated for that quite well.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you for your testimony and your thoughtful comments, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Okay, I'll invite the, Mr. Strike, question for petitioner?
This will be a question for the petitioner.
If you want to come up, Ms. Ritter, you have 2 minutes, 15 seconds in your rebuttal time, and it sounds like you might have a question as well.
Okay. I just want to thank Mr. McNamara for his testimony and thoughtful comments as well. Just wanted to clarify, so the access road is actually half paved. So before you get, if you're coming onto the site, once you get through the gates, before you get to the excavation area, it's actually half of that's paved, which means when trucks are leaving the site, they have a paved driveway that they can drive on and kind of shake off material before they go through the gate.
Can you point that out?
Yeah.
Where the pavement starts and ends?
The pavement starts, I mean, all the way on here, and then it ends.
They're coming in. This is obviously paved.
You're gonna either Michelle, you're gonna need to talk. Or...
So they're obviously Eklutna Park Drive is paved. then the access road is also paved to right about here, but admittedly, that paving deteriorates a bit as you come to the end. But, I mean, you're talking what, 3/4 mile?
So that also helps in the dust mitigation. And when they put the second gate in, they also went to a key fob system, which allows trucks to go in and not have to wait for someone to come and open the gates. And they have signs that say no idling and no using the Jake brake, and they enforce that. So there have been a lot of really good preventative measures. And that's just it for my rebuttal. I think I'll save if there's any questions, and thank everybody for their time.
Thanks, Mr. Strike. Did you?
Yeah. The first one was, and this is more as a comment, I got beaten up last time I talked about this, but covered loads. No, it's not a requirement, but we'd sure like to see and make sure that all the loads were covered, not contained. That's one. And the other is the Eklutna Park Drive was built by, I believe, Eklutna when they developed the subdivision, or it was brought up to standards. And the standards that was brought up, my experience has been, typically isn't thinking about 30 years of hard truck driving on it. And ultimately, those roads then are turned over, I believe, to the municipality now to maintain those roads. But those roads are going, that part of that road is going to take a beating. Yet it's going to be the municipality, and this is posed as a question, that will be expected to maintain that road as a result of the additional beating it's taken as a result of 30 years or 15 years or 20 years of heavy truck usage? Is that the intent?
That's a good question. And I believe that it does transfer to the municipality.
Do you know when that road does transfer the to the municipality?
The road right now, the
Is it?
municipality.
Okay, it is there.
Okay.
Okay.
So, you know, if from a freeze thaw, from a spring, from a heavy load, all these circumstances that when we have weight limits, yet we're taxing that section of the road, we have wetlands in the area. I can tell you right now, it's going to take a beating. There's going to be huge potholes. There's going to be dips and valleys and so forth that form over the next 10 years. And we see this in subdivisions next to that are being developed in the first phase, second phase. We see this with heavy trucks, even in the industrial areas in Midtown Anchorage. Yet it becomes a municipal, therefore a taxpayer problem to maintain the road caused by the excessive traffic. Solution?
Let me hear you. Go ahead.
I mean, I would say, I mean, I don't have a solution. I would say that they are also, you know, a taxpayer. But I don't know what your maintenance is with that.
I don't know what the answer is maybe at this juncture, other than a mea culpa or whatever, but I have not seen this addressed in the past, but it's a genuine concern that I've witnessed firsthand. I want to see this go. We need to see these types of activities, but the unintended consequences that come downstream, whether it's to the neighbors, whether it's to the municipality, there is going to be an impact. There is going to be a cost. It is going to cost somebody something for you to enjoy the benefits of extracting the gravel.
Mr. Looney, go ahead.
Yes, I have a follow-up question. Actually, just in following up what Commissioner Strike was asking, to put things in perspective, you're currently operating the fill site right next door. What's the level of truck traffic that would typically be that road would be experiencing based on those operations? And how's the road handling that?
Go ahead. I'll jump in.
Okay, he'll clarify, but I think they're seeing somewhere between 70 and 90 trucks on a good day. That site's not been incredibly active, but the road is generally not potholed, and it's not the best road in Anchorage, but it doesn't have the frost heaving and the potholes to date. But do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's a good question. It's a good point. I'm not going to sit here and deny the fact that some trucks would definitely be detrimental to that roadway. Where it is right now, it's 70 and 90 on a really good day. There hasn't been a lot of activity, so I don't think that would be, although it might work better for my argument, it's not indicative of what would happen when you have an increased load with gravel, and then you'd also have the haul in. If you're
Go ahead.
If you're asking, for a solution, I think maybe a fair balance is to when we have the review period of the project, if we can, at that point, we say, hey, you have caused damage to these operations to that small portion of the road. Repaving might be considered. I don't know I don't want to get into a debate whether that's fair or not for us, but I don't want that point to hold up our approval.
Go ahead, Mr. Strike.
So you wouldn't have a problem with having that as a topic during the first review period, or during the review period?
To put it, I would rather have that as a topic and this approved than that be a reason for striking this down. So,
fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Any other questions for petitioner?
Mr. Strike, my name is Tim Potter, for the record. Just wanted to note that this portion of the road that you're talking about is partially state because of the interchange and was built to a very high standard. And the rest of it was constructed to at least municipal standards. It has held up very well. If you go and inspect it now, the pavement looks very good. And sitting up in the audience listening, I would suggest that you do make it a topical discussion item for the reviews as they come forward. You should also note that now that the property has become activated for a commercial use, it will also be paying taxes, more so than it has in the past. So they will be contributing that way as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Any further questions for the petitioner? Any at all? I don't see any. Thank you for your testimony. At this point, I would like to, we'll close the public hearing. What's the wish of the commission? Mr. Spring.
Yes. I move to approve the conditional use to allow natural resource extraction on track 37, located 1.5 miles west of North Eagle River Road, exit off of the Glen Highway, with the conditions of approval recommended by staff and with the following three edits, if I may. Number one involves 4F, provide a limited TIA analysis for approval by ADOT PF, including an update of the current traffic count and level of service at the interchange of the Glen Highway. Is that okay? Okay. The second edit would be suggested by the staff on number 6. And correct me if I misinterpreted this, staff. Filling of trucks from processed material stockpiles and from operating asphalt batch plant is permitted 24 hours, 7 days a week, only for DOT projects, unless otherwise determined by the Department of Health and Human Services.
Mr. Spring, one correction. It's complicated, this sentence, because it's processing of material stockpiles is in with the operations of the asphalt batch plant. It might be clear just to separate the two and have another sentence that reads, filling of trucks from processed material stockpiles is permitted 24 hours, 7 days a week for DOT projects only.
Can I incorporate that in my motion?
So just so we're clear, it's, you want the first sentence to still read the filling of trucks from process, you want to read that and then add this as well?
Yes, just to clarify it. Might be simpler than trying to work this into that sentence.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Third is the changing of condition number 10 and replacing it with the amended version that was laid on the table. You want me to read that?
Yes, please.
Lori? And I have a small edit to that staff recommendation. This approval is valid until February 13, 2027. Time extension requests shall be reviewed by the Commission as a non-public hearing every 5 years after the year 2027 until site activities have ended. The Commission, at its discretion, may schedule time extension request as a public hearing. If during the period of approval, the Planning Department determines that the petitioner is in violation of the conditions of approval or has created environmental problems either on-site or off-site, including degradation of the existing roadway leading out of the site to the Glen Highway, then the petitioner shall return to the Commission for a public hearing.
Okay. Get that? We'll get it. All right. So there's a motion on the table to approve conditional use permit with the staff conditions and the 3 additions mentioned by Mr. Spring. Can I get a second to that first, please? Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Strike, you have a comment.
Yes, I wanted to address the petitioner during this part of the process to ask them if any of these additional changes do you have any concerns with any of these additions?
I'll allow it. We don't typically do that, but go ahead.
Just on condition 6, if you could reread that, the way I understood it is that it was, I guess I just want to make sure that it's allowing filling of processed material and the filling of asphalt for DOT projects. I was unclear of what was being changed.
I believe the intent, and this is so for my clarity as well, is that basically any 24-hour operation outside of the normal hours that are stipulated, if it's a 24-hour operation, it has to be for DOT purposes only.
The sentence you heard, it'll sound redundant, but you'll see the same sentence in there already.
Okay.
And then you'll have it redundantly stated specific to DOT. So rather than wordsmith the whole thing, it'll just come across that way. But
Okay.
you have it the same thing as it exists, and then the clarification that Sharon read.
Okay, I thank you for that. I wanted to make sure we were good on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Strike, anything else? Mr. Spring, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, the petition for the conditional use meets all the standards for conditional use for a natural resource extraction. And we've heard from the public that the existing operations by the petitioner, Klutna Inc., in the area have not resulted in any real major problems. And the conditions that are adopted will address any remaining problems that there might be.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. I'd like to call the vote to the commission. This conditional use permit is approved. Thank you for your findings, Mr. Spring. Any additional findings? I think we're good there. Thank you, the petitioner and member of the public. We're going to take about a 5-minute recess. Thanks. All right, I'd like to call everybody back. Good progress to date. We are down to the last item, I think. Unless Mr. Walker wants to go into some significant depth into this committee reports or whatever else he likes to have us linger on. Next up, case 2017-30, Municipality of Anchorage Public Works Review and Recommendation per AR 2013-296S by the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Assembly of the 2016 update to the Municipal Design Criteria Chapter 2 Drainage, outlining stormwater management and drainage design criteria for Anchorage development. Could we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Project Management Engineering Department, Watershed Management Section identified necessary and efficient changes to the Design Criteria Manual, DCM, Chapter 2 Drainage, and have provided the attached draft for your review. This draft was written following an extensive 2-year rewrite period, which was led by a Stormwater DCM Drainage Committee made up of municipal staff and a volunteer group of engineering and hydrology professionals. This committee conducted regular meetings to examine ways in which they could improve watershed health with easily interpreted regulation changes. In addition to committee meetings, several public meetings were conducted and comments were received during a public comment period in the spring of 2016. The Planning Department has reviewed the draft update to the DCM for any potential conflicts with the current language in Title 21. It has been determined that there will be negligible impacts to Title 21 as the DCM is referenced by title only, with specific language from the DCM being omitted from Title 21. The Planning Department recommends approval of the draft Design Criteria Manual, Chapter 2 Drainage. And I'd just like to thank the Commission for attending the work session, and applicant is available for questions and testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question. So what happens if a section of the DCM, it needs to be modified?
Mr. Chairman, so in Title 21, it's just by title only that it says the applicant or petitioner shall refer to the Design Criteria Manual. So it doesn't state, for instance, you have to have a wetland species of grass around a stormwater retention pond. It just simply states you must refer to the Design Criteria Manual. So as the Design Criteria Manual is changed, Title 21 should be unaffected.
So you're saying that even though we're adopting this document, and presumably the Assembly is with all of the details in it, that subsequent changes to those details can be made without that same review?
Correct, because it just points back to the DCM in Title 21. So if those changes occur in the DCM, the petitioner or the applicant would just have to refer back to the DCM. So. Yep.
Christy, you want to address that?
Yes, please.
And please state your name again for the.
I'm Christy Bischofberger, Watershed Manager for the Municipality of Anchorage and Project Manager for the Chapter 2 Design Criteria. And with me, just in case I refer to her for a question or two, is Janie Dussel, co-author of the Chapter 2 Drainage Design Criteria. My take on your question is that given that this new procedure has been put in place for both P&Z and the Assembly to review the drainage design criteria, I would assume that any changes would probably be compiled over the course of a number of months and brought to this body all at once for weigh-in for approval.
So you think it would go through the full change? I mean, that can cut both ways. One is that people can be worried that it's off here changing and no one knows about it, and it can also lead to quite a time commitment to actually make changes that people agree might be important. So it sort of cuts both ways. We've seen that a lot with Title 21, that sort of waiting for those changes, even though we know there's something wrong with it. So, but your view is it would come through that full process.
Yep, this is a first. but I would assume unless a policy was to be put in place that changes that are not X, Y, or Z
Right.
could be made without.
So how do you think that would, I mean, in the past, granted we have some new stuff in this chapter that we haven't had before, but what's happened in the past, how frequently has the DCM been amended?
Decades go by sometimes.
Without amendments?
Without amendment. But new changes, big changes like this, we might see another set of changes soon, and then it might settle down, and as it gets tried and true, I would think that we would have fewer changes.
So clearly there's an opportunity within the first year period where you could go, I think I heard that you can either go with the existing rules or the new rules for a year once this is adopted. Is that right?
That's the intent.
So there's that kind of time to figure stuff out. But so, other than that, is there another suggestion on how you would potentially expedite changes that would still meet with some level of community review?
We could perhaps call the committee that put this together with us in the first place and vet it with them, and if it's agreed by the majority, then we could put it perhaps through without it coming here, or if it's not a substantial monetary change to the way people do business, we could maybe do it that way.
Any commissioners have thought? I mean, it almost sounds like we're being asked to make a policy recommendation as to how that would take place, whether it would go through the full notice process, planning and zoning process, public hearing, our action onto the assembly, which sort of, in my experience, at best case takes 4 months and normally takes more like 6 months to get something through, or that we recommend that there be some consideration for an expedited process with some technical review.
May I add something to that discussion?
Sure.
Just in what we've seen from people that have used the draft DCM to date, or have tried to apply it to projects, because, like I said, there has earlier in our work session, there has been some excitement over incorporating it. We have seen enough points of clarification, so not maybe huge substantial changes to the content, but changes that require us to clarify an intent of something. It would be very helpful if there was a way forward when those types of things come up, especially when in that first year, because I expect that there will be more of those the more widely used the document becomes.
Go ahead, Mr. Spring.
It just occurred to me, why is the Planning and Zoning Commission involved with this anyway?
Because it's in Title 21.
But we reference other things in Title 21, don't we? I mean, this isn't the only reference we make in Title 21, I'm assuming. And we don't review all those other documents, do we?
You want to shed some light on the history? I think
There
some
was-
people here know about it.
There was an ordinance put through a few years ago based on some heartburn. I think it was either a P&Z member or an assembly member had on a change that was made. And so the ordinance made it so that this process had to be in place for all design criteria. There's been a lot of question along the lines that you just expressed, that this may not be the appropriate kind of information to be approved.
So if we wanted to speed things up, we could recommend that the future process eliminate us.
Well, you could. I mean, and I'll go to Ms. Bailey in a second. But I mean, just keep in mind the existing process was neither adopted by P&Z nor the Assembly, correct?
Correct.
So just the committee recommends it, reviews it, and then someone just does that, and there it is.
It was overseen by the municipal engineer, and if it was deemed prudent and it seemed to pass the straight face test, it became code.
Right. Ms. Bailey.
Some of the other commissioners have mentioned how this would get updated. Just as a preliminary question, have there already been many suggestions for changes? Do you suspect that to happen annually? Do you expect it to happen monthly? Do you have any idea on how often this may be requested to be updated?
Well, once we're through some of the procedural questions, I wouldn't see there being a lot of change to what's in the design criteria. It's been thought through pretty well, and I believe it's going to, you know, in terms of any mandates being the supporting reason for it, I think those have stabilized quite a bit in the last few years, so I don't think that's going to be a driver. So I wouldn't expect a lot of change.
And then as a follow-up, just as we're kind of looking how to implement this further, how often it gets reported back, I know a lot of other organizationally, a lot of other things will operate that when they're out of session, that specific members can kind of approve things, and then it goes back to the full board. Do you think kind of a middle ground there would work, where, as planning staff suggested, if the DCM was updated, that would be the standing practice, and then at the end of the year, they would be brought up to the planning commission or I'm not sure who it would go to, but as a formal acceptance of those changes. Do you think something like that would be appropriate?
I could see that working if there's a running tally of changes that are made, and then they're just put forward, whether or not they're for action or for advisory or just information, doing something like that.
Thank you.
Mr. Looney. You hit your mic, please, Brian.
Follow up on the previous conversation. Essentially, it must have been the old model, but I do recall when, until just recently, they were almost like annually, each chapter would have modifications. I think in the very front page, there's a place where sometimes it would indicate this is the 2015 version, and it would actually list what changes were made since the original one was done, kind of thing. So there was a way for, as things need to be fixed and updated, rather than having to reinvent the whole thing, you just have it, changes to it as you go. And like you said, I think it was typically done by the municipal engineer. But this new model, you make it sound like it's would you try to follow that same model, I guess, and try to do some annual tweaks or housekeeping things?
I think so. I mean, as they come up, we'll certainly deal with them right there, and if we can just add them in as a...
That would make a lot of sense to me.
And if I may, so the question is, clearly there's going to be tweaks and they ought to be made, and the question then becomes, do they not get to be made until they go through this process? So literally then you are hung up making them. In the past, the municipal engineer could sign off on them, right? And they were ready to go right then and there for whatever project, public or private, was at hand. Or do you say, and I think what I would suggest, what it sounded like planning staff was saying, is that'd be okay with us. It's still referenced in this document, but within that, the change doesn't necessarily have to go through us in the assembly before it takes the place. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that's easily a 6-month process.
I would definitely support, like the planning department was mentioning, that it could be done without this body's involvement.
Yeah,
it would make more sense.
And then the same thing goes. I mean, clearly the assembly would need to weigh in on whether they thought it could bypass them in a similar way, right? I mean, because in the past that's how it's been done. It's bypassed the assembly, and I think you're right, Christy. Someone at some point felt like changes that happen outside of any kind of additional public review by the policymakers was not something that they were comfortable with, and so I get that other side of it as well.
I guess I could add one more thing.
Sure.
Just from my observations are that this change, or this one chapter, is one of the biggest changes I've seen for a while. You know, and it has implications, which we'll talk about a little later, that will change projects probably more so than I can even imagine the other chapters could ever do, kind of thing. We'll see that.
Interesting. Yeah. Any other questions of staff or anything else you want to, I mean, thank you for your work session earlier. Anything else you feel like we need to consider at this point before we go to public hearing?
I haven't thought of anything over and above what we discussed earlier, but we're here for questions no matter what.
Okay. Well, what we will do is we'll open for public hearing, and we'll bring you back up after the close of that public hearing. Okay? At this point, I'd like to invite the public forward to testify on Chapter 2 of the Municipal Design Criteria Manual on drainage. If you're a member of a group, you get 5 minutes to testify. Individual, 3 minutes to testify. Hi.
Hello. My name's Mel Langdon, Langdon. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, an individual. I'm a registered civil engineer in Alaska, and I've been working in Anchorage for over 20 years. I specialize in water resources and stormwater and drainage. And currently I'm in private practice. And I did serve on the technical advisory committee for the update to this design criteria manual. So I was involved in the process that went through to consolidate the 4 different manuals that we had before and streamline some of the submittal requirements and design criteria. I'm in favor of seeing this put in place. I think, first of all, as I mentioned, it will consolidate all these different manuals and bring them in one place. This makes it easier for the designers to understand what the submittal process is and the kinds of documentation that needs to go in with it. But also, I think it will help the municipal reviewers have the kind of information in place against which they review submittals. It provides alternatives for water quality treatment so that the designers can better fit their particular projects to the municipal criteria, which was not actually as clear in previous versions of this design criteria manual for drainage. And it provides some updated information unique to Anchorage and different parts of Anchorage, as Janie mentioned about the Girdwood precipitation being significantly different, and that the design should be appropriate to the kinds of rainfall and runoff events we're going to see in that part of the municipality. Adopting this new criteria or updated criteria will help demonstrate our compliance with the stormwater discharge permit that we have been issued by the DEC and that we report on every 5 years. And finally, as far as the review process through the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Assembly, one suggestion you might consider if you were to approve these changes is to maybe require an annual report on the suggested changes to the design criteria, and that way there would be maybe a set time and process for reviewing any changes that might be necessary or that have come up in the period of time. And that's all.
Great. Thanks, Mel. Appreciate your testimony. Anybody else wishing to testify?
Good evening. My name is Brian Harten, Harten, and I work for a developer here in Anchorage. And I don't want to appear to be unappreciative of the work done by the staff and everybody putting this policy together, the DCM upgrade together. But I have several concerns with the new DCM code related to the cost and size of the mandated green options versus traditional methods that all of Anchorage uses right now. And that if a site doesn't have the size or the soil conditions to use any of the approved green options, that we have to go through a variance process to use what we currently use now. And the power of that variance to approve or deny is in the hands of the municipal engineer. Another power given to the municipal engineer in the new DCM is to impose even greater standards and criteria when deemed appropriate. And that just gives a little too much gray area in my mind to the municipal engineer. And then he has additional power written in code to have the discretion to require additional downstream analysis beyond the project, which in my interpretation could set us developers up to possibly being liable to develop downstream infrastructure just to get our project in the ground. And so all of those powers are concerning to me. We all understand the design process, the science behind the engineering, the plan review, the code analysis is all supposed to be apolitical, but from time to time politics does influence decisions. And we worry about that, whether it's a powerful neighbor or what have you. Also, there's been some concerns speaking to members of the design community that did participate in this, whose comments are actually listed in one of the appendices, that this document doesn't look much like the one that they reviewed in 2015. And I'd like to see if we could get a chance to have one more round of comment from the design community on this document before we go full steam ahead. One of the interesting points that was brought to my attention was the storm event criteria So
thanks, Brian. I think there's going to be some questions for you, but
okay.
Could I get you to just briefly tell me the issue that you have with the storm event?
Well, just if nothing else changed, they've increased the storm event depth increase for a 10-year event by 29%, and from the 100-year event by 45%. And those volumes would, even using just traditional methods that were used, or conventional methods today, just would drastically increase the sizes of those facilities too.
Yeah. There's going to be some questions. First, Ms. Bailey, go ahead.
You mentioned that the current plan allows too much discretion for downstream impact analysis. Do you believe that people are currently doing any downstream impact analysis? Is that standard practice now?
I'm not directly involved in the design side, but yes, there is consideration given to that right now. And in fact, one of the projects we had, because the municipality deemed their downstream facilities to be inadequate, we had to take a building lot off the table and create a detention pond. So there is still that going on right now without any of these changes.
Thank you.
A question. So you mentioned the variance process, and as it's currently proposed, it's with municipal engineer. If it was up to you, what would the variance process look like?
Well, I guess if it was up to me, we wouldn't have just the green options as our only way forward, that we could have some traditional methods available too without having to go to a variance. And the criteria that needs to be met, the way I read it, and I'm not as I'm not as detail oriented in this plan as I probably should be testifying, but the criteria is that if it's not feasible, and or this, and that would be with the soils or the site layout or whatnot. But one of the other things that can't be considered for variance is cost.
Right.
We can't include finances in this, even though when the municipality takes on their own projects, they're allowed to consider cost on scope and size and what they do, but it handcuffs us as a developer.
So right now there are processes that, when they do involve costs of a certain level, that the municipality will consider. So, for example, I know we've gotten out of building storm sewer because it was, represented a certain percentage of our overall project, and so there is some, at least in some municipal processes, some ability to look at cost. But it sounds like your testimony is that you can't ignore cost when you use the word feasibility.
Right. And in my interpretation of how this is written, that's taken off the table. We can't use that as a justification.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Harton? No. Thanks for your testimony, Brian.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Anyone else wishing to testify? There's only one other option in the room. Yes, no? No, you good. All right. Mr. Walker, go ahead.
I have a question for the applicant.
Yeah.
I guess you haven't closed yet, so I'll let you.
No, I think, yeah, so at this point,
your
we'll,
gavel, or?
I can do this for them, right? Technically, I'll leave it open for them to still talk,
Okay.
but the public testimony portion is closed. And Christy, if you want to come back up, it'd be great. Yeah. Go ahead, Brandon.
So we heard testimony that this version that we're looking at now is substantially different from a version that was circulated in 2015 for review by the industry. Can you comment on that, or?
When the comments came back from the 2015 review, or the document, we made some changes and we put it out to that committee. We had one or two meetings afterward, but we did an email distribution of this and pointed out the changes. I think you've got some of those change documents in front of you. So it wasn't for lack of trying to communicate the information and look for feedback. The number of meetings we had at that point had decreased quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Remind me what our responsibility is related to our stormwater permit in terms of timeline and everything else.
We are in the second year of a 5-year term, okay. And this was due with the start of the permit.
Of the first year. So you're 2 years behind, basically.
Pretty much.
And you have an agreement, a certain allowance of a certain period of time. I mean, what is your understanding with DEC of the timeline that you have?
Generally, I find if we're making progress, then we can pass the straight face test on intent.
Okay. Ms. Bailey.
In the information presentation earlier, I asked a question about the impact analysis and why the 10% threshold was removed, and I just want to make sure I was interpreting the information session correctly. Was it your belief that one of the reasons the 10% point was removed was because it essentially was not being followed, and can you speak more to that issue?
Sure. So the 10% point is how far downstream the impact analysis is supposed to go and where it's supposed to stop. It was actually removed, that particular piece of the analysis was removed because it was very confusing. And even designers that are experts in this field had a hard time determining what that point was. So it made it very difficult for projects to comply, basically. It also made it really difficult for the municipal reviewers to ensure that that was actually being done, because it's a complicated concept. So to simplify how far downstream the analysis is intended to go, the language has been changed to be more specific to the project, so that as I mentioned in the session, if you have a small project in a very large basin, it's reasonable to assume that your impacts will not go as far downstream as if you have a really big project in a really small basin. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Just as a follow-up, is there an objectionable way to express as a standard other than something, I think it was, the wording was determined through designer judgment?
Designer judgment. So there is actually an entire discussion of that in the chapter that I didn't get into the weeds with it during our work session. There's some guidance in there specifically of how to do it. As far as a hard and fast rule, I actually looked very hard for one, and I looked at other design criteria across the nation to find out if and how this is being done. The issue that we have in Anchorage that's a little bit unique compared to a lot of other communities of our size is two things. One is we do not have a comprehensive stormwater plan or stormwater model for the entire Anchorage Bowl. Most communities of our size do, so they could tell you where their pipes are, how big they are, how much flow capacity they have. If they're currently over capacity, they would have that much the way AWU does for our community now. A lot of communities our size, in fact, most of them, Fairbanks even has this done, they have a model, they have some way to have all of that inventoried and cataloged and all that information accessible so that downstream impacts are not as much of a big deal because they can look at the system and know where the capacity problems are before the developers start, right? Anchorage doesn't have that. It's something that is recognized by lots of different parties that it's necessary and it needs to happen, but it's a pretty big undertaking at this point, right? So we don't have that. So coming up with a plan that works for our community and is not so cumbersome on anyone trying to do development was sort of the intent behind the changes that we are proposing.
Thank you for explaining that.
Mr. Spring, then Mr. Looney.
Yeah, I think there's a comment about the desirability of having a master stormwater plan, right? Which would get to this issue, right? How do we promote something like that from the commission? I mean, it's probably not proper to put it in the ordinance, or is it? Is there any way we can affect change somehow, if that's desirable?
I don't think it belongs in this ordinance, but I definitely think that a request from this body to the Assembly to fund a stormwater master plan would be more than adequate to get that idea moving forward.
I would also add that there's money, I think, in the budget to do an analysis of what a stormwater utility would look like in Anchorage, right? To sort of look at that. So then not only do we not know what's going on, but we have no ability to really plan, maintain, or program, which is what's so scary about then adding additional requirements, because often it falls onto the private sector. But I think some of that is in the, am I right, Christy? It's in the budget to sort of
The quarter budget revision will look at the initial startup funding for a stormwater utility. There's so many other things that are tied to that as well. Not only long-term funding the different projects that need to happen, but being able to provide any incentives. It's all part of having some sort of stormwater master plan and some sense of how much an action costs or what allowances can be given.
And a known source of funding to do something with it. Mr. Looney.
Yes, I really just wanted to bring up the topic that came up during the previous session, and the previous speaker mentioned some of this too. But just the inherent cost of doing these green solutions, and the example on West Diamond Boulevard, although they really didn't have an option at that location, there really was no city system to tie into. But that was really an on-site infiltration system for a roadway project that probably cost somewhere in the magnitude of $1 million. I guess I thought, and you mentioned earlier that it may have been redundant or just overbuilt, just because of the fact there's no facilities to really overflow into. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So the West Diamond system, to the best of my understanding, and I obviously am not the designer, but the West Diamond system, to my understanding, that area is not serviced by storm drain. So the facility that was put in there was required not to do just stormwater treatment, right? Which the green infrastructure pieces that we're proposing be required per our permit are for treating the first half inch of rainfall. That system was, which is like considered our 90th percentile event. It's a very common rain event in Anchorage. That system was very likely designed for the 100-year event, which is probably 2.5 to 3 inches of rain. The reason being they had nowhere else to take their water, right? I also am fairly certain that there were several factors of safety, as a responsible designer would do. There's several factors of safety built into that in terms of soil capacity, in terms of volume and things like that. So while that project is a good example of the technology working, it's maybe not a great example of utilizing those types of tools just for stormwater treatment, because it is sort of intended for a different purpose. It's a great example for sites that don't want to hook up to the storm drain of what they could do and sort of how the two could work together. If they wanted to, fully manage everything on site, they could take a similar approach. But in terms of just providing stormwater treatment, I'm trying to think of better examples. There's a rain garden at Taku Lake that's treating a very large area of parking lot, surrounding area. A portion of the access road that goes into it and King Street all drains to that. It's a pretty large drainage basin that's treated by a rain garden there that's been performing since 2007. It's doing really well. So that's a better example because it's just there for treatment. There's a few other examples around town that. The bank parking lot in Spinard. That's a great one. Yeah. So the Fisherman's Bank. Fisherman's Bank. Thank you. That's at Spinard and Wisconsin, I believe, is the cross street there. That project was built several years ago, maybe 2009. And it actually incorporates the green infrastructure treatment in with the project landscaping. So they have their perimeter landscaping and they have everything sort of designed to drain into their landscaping with appropriate overflow. So there's a giant beehive in the middle that goes to the storm drain if the landscaping and gets overwhelmed. And that meets the intent. I mean, it takes that first half inch and absorbs it, and once things become saturated, it just flows on downstream. So there's a lot of ways to incorporate it that are not, I think a lot of people, when they first hear the concept, they picture these giant stormwater basins and these huge vaults that are underground. And while that can be an option if you want to do a lot of, if you have a huge project or you want to do a very large storm event, what we're really asking for is much smaller than that. And I think can be incorporated without an astronomical cost, depending on, obviously, the project constraints.
The previous discussion, you like you just said, if you bring these topics up early and get it coordinated between the landscaping plan and the rain gardens, it can really be a win-win for everybody, kind of thing. So those are over time. I guess we'll get to that point. We're just not there yet, I don't think.
Yes, absolutely. So this potential of incorporating green infrastructure into other things that you're doing on site anyway, such as landscaping, is a great one. Is really there. And can be, like you just said, can be very beautifully done when it's done at the starting stages of design. So before you have set grade, before you've decided where all of your inlets are going to go, before you've placed all of your landscaping, if you can sort of bring everybody together at the start of the project and incorporate everything into truly a sustainable design for in multiple different ways, it can work very well. Once you're at 65 and 95% design, when this is done as an afterthought, is when we start seeing more projects that really just don't fit or don't perform well or things like that. It does very well at the ground level.
On this notion of the variance process, is there something else that you could think of that maybe was, the municipal engineer with a small review board? I mean, I think the thing that's challenging, you either, when there's nobody here to testify on things that have the potential to cause significant cost, you either did a fantastic job, you either did a horrible job, or the stuff that you're talking about is so highly technical that it's very hard to sort of, engage, right? Or people get tired. I mean, and that's really, I think, what's happened. It's hard to engage on that level. You're engaging with designers, but you haven't until it gets in front of the assembly and starts to get real and people really start to pencil out their projects and the implications, and that's when they really kind of will come forward. But is there, to the person that testified, I mean, is there something to be said where rather than the power being only within the municipality and rather than it having to go through this big, long, deliberative process, is there something in between that involves, a review panel made up of public and private people?
Addressing the first part first, the process allows for looking, there's worksheets that walk them through it, looking at the green infrastructure, and if it's not feasible, it allows for traditional methods such as oil and grit separators, etc. And that doesn't take any kind of process. It falls out of the data. You can do it or you can't do it. And if they want to do alternative designs, then it doesn't go before this body. There's another worksheet you put in to request And you have to make a case, absolutely, but it doesn't go through the variance process like we think of it as being paid for and comes to this body and the whole process for weeks.
Changes to the rules would require that potentially, the overall rules, if that's how we decided we were going to deal with this. But your point's well taken, that on an individual project, it just goes to, in this case, Mr. Kohlhaas at this point, right? The municipal engineer.
Correct.
Did I miss anything? I would just add, if you guys actually did want to look at the forms that we have developed that actually would walk someone through that process, they're in, I believe it's the last appendix in the document, which I think is L as in Lima.
Yeah, and I think sort of fundamentally the issue with this board is that that's not, generally speaking, the expertise of the membership of our board to get into that level of review. I mean, that's not why we typically have a planning commission. So we're kind of dealing with high-level policy stuff generally, right? We're not getting into the technical pieces, and I think that's why I personally, I mean, it's great that Brian is here, and stroke of luck that it's his first meeting here with us this evening. But generally speaking, I think the rest of us are, not the experts on these topics. And so I think what our review is based on, and has to be based on, is what are we hearing from other people? What are the global issues? Are there process issues that need to be thought through? If we get it wrong, building in some of those safeguards so that we don't all get ourselves into a bind. So. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody else feel like you're willing to move this one along to the next stage, which is assembly adoption? Is there anything else you'd like to see? Go ahead, Greg.
I guess I had one question, too, that came up earlier that I didn't get a chance to ask, but back to the single-family homes that doesn't apply, what about those properties along streams? As we talk about, because I think we're coming up with an issue for, like Valley of the Moon, those areas along the creek beds, the drainage areas. Does this impact those small lots?
Well,
It's designed, what I've read is no, but should it?
if they're going into some sort of development process, it would affect them, but them sitting on their lots as they are, it does not.
Okay.
Mr. Spring.
Yes, I agree. I'm over my head on this issue pretty much, and I am also glad.
The first, by the way.
I'm pretty cocky. I have a lot of self-confidence, but I think it might be a good idea to consider something like we did for Title 21. I believe there was like a interim period after it was adopted, and worked through some projects, and it became clearer then what some of the problems were, right? And we're still discovering some of the problems, I think. Maybe that's just something we can suggest here after a year. Convene, I think Mel suggested that, I believe, and it's probably a good idea. Convene a forum of developers that have done a project with this and, get some feedback. And maybe we could hear the feedback. I don't know if we want to, or the assembly could, and then make a decision as to what adjustments might be made. It's just impossible for me to foresee what the problems are with these. I can't do it, but I think it would. That's just, I'm throwing that out as a.
Yeah, I mean, this affects the public like it does the private sector, right? I mean, if I were to ask you, Spenard Road is getting redone this year between Hillcrest and Benson. What would be the impact on the road design if this were in place compared to how it was designed? I mean, I understand you're not going to give me an engineering answer, but like, just to give us a sense, is there an order of magnitude? Would it cost X amount of dollars? Would it cost X amount more right-of-way that was already constrained within that, not 60-foot, but greater than 60-foot roadway? How do we try to grasp what the impacts are?
I would say, and I'm not super familiar with that entire project area and with the drainage system that's currently there. But for other projects that I'm working on that is already incorporating portions of this requirement, so for example, I do work on several DOT projects, and they are under the same APDS requirements, and so have been incorporating this type of requirement already. So I would say the impacts that you would see there would probably just be in terms of your conveyance system would need to be larger, a little bit larger, because our design storms have increased, right, the way that we talked about earlier in the work session. So it's going to be a little bit bigger pipe. If the downstream receiving system is very small, as many of the systems in town are already at capacity and have known capacity issues, then that project, even today, though, that project would need to do something to address that. So that's not necessarily new, but it would play into the overall system design. And the treatment component would be incorporated with the detention system. They would be done sort of together as one system if a competent designer were doing it. So the cost there would really be negligible. If you were doing detention anyway, you would incorporate the treatment with it, and it would be fairly small.
But I think, you don't really know, right? I mean, you wouldn't really know unless you did the analysis of it, right?
Correct.
And I mean, it sounds good. I mean, we have features in some of our projects that look good, but I have no idea what the real impact, is unless I were to try to see if I could do the same thing over again and what the cost would be. And I think that gives me some trepidation, because I think we want to make sure we do the right thing from a drainage standpoint, but we also want to make sure that we don't stifle ourselves in other ways when it's already challenging to do development work. Mr. Looney.
To follow up with where you just left that, as far as the larger design storm, bigger pipes. So really, almost every pipe system is going to be undersized with this new criteria. I'm just thinking the implications in my mind, but in almost every downstream facility, because quite often, Anchorage does have master plans for most drainage areas. Either they're not all glued together in a master for everything, but you can go to a Fish Creek and there is a master plan for just that. But based on those new criteria, all those master plans would need to be updated, of course. And so if all the developments, townhomes, were based on those plans, all of a sudden, whatever they were planning to put in is going to have to be, enlarged, made bigger, and everything that's downstream of their lot is going to be undersized. And so how far do you chase that? And is that going to be the cost? Is that going to be a burden of developers? How far downstream? I guess, go ahead.
That's a really good question, and it's one that has been brought up several times throughout this process. It's a difficult one to address without having, and when I say a master plan for the entire municipality, the Fish Creek and the Chester Creek and the Campbell Creek master plans are wonderful documents for planning purposes. But when I say master plan, I envision a more technical document than that, one that would actually pull together sizes and capacities and things like that, which we don't always have in those drainage basins. Without that tool, it does make this implementation a little bit harder than it would be otherwise. But to speak to specifically the increased rainfall design events, it's important for this commission and for anybody considering this to understand the implications of what would happen if we continue to design with rain events that we know are no longer the best information available. So as a designer, you are, or rather we are, responsible for ensuring public safety to the best of our abilities on the projects that we put out there. Using information from a 2001 study that was done by a private consultant here in Anchorage over a 2012 study available from NOAA, in my opinion, if damages were to result from that, I think the consultant could be considered negligent by not using the best information available. So I am a huge proponent of doing the best we can, even if it isn't perfect, even if we know that there's going to have to be some integration and some figuring out of what to do with those downstream systems. I do think that ignoring the problem and extending and continuing to design with something that we know is under-designed is probably not the best way to go. It's also worth pointing out that across the United States, in the past maybe 3 to 5 years, there have been several states that have had catastrophic flood events from unprecedented rainfall, unprecedented amounts of rainfall. I mean, currently, if you look at the emergency happening in Northern California with the Oroville Dam, it's a really good example. They have never, once before in the history on record, they've had rain equivalent to what they're having now, and they've evacuated thousands of people. So it has happened in North Carolina, it happened in Louisiana, it's happening, it could happen here, and if and when it does, I think our project should be putting the best foot forward in terms of making sure that public and private facilities are as safe as they can be.
You know, you've made the argument very clearly for our community, and I think that's what Mr. Spring was saying. I think, you know, I would support it. I'm sure a lot of people would support that notion. It comes down to how do you effectuate that change? I mean, just like anything, right? I mean, I think that if you said, it's again, Brian said, how far downstream do you make a private developer chase something, knowing that, frankly, if the municipality really knew its master plan situation, we'd realize the extent to which we are deficient. And at that point, what would we say? What would be our policy directive? We're not doing anything else until what? I mean, to me, I feel like you can't even start to implement this until you have the tools for the municipality to be able to respond. I can affect my lot. I can't go chasing something way down here, right? I can't. And you don't have the tools to do that.
The municipality is going to have to partner in this infrastructure upgrade. There's no question about it. And so there is a huge need for a funding source to do that. In the meantime, it's going to be some interesting conversations as to how the developer will work into a system that's already undersized. But they can't take the whole brunt of it.
I'd kind of like to ask Hal if he's still over there. I mean, you know, we're sitting here. The other thing that we would be doing here this evening if we didn't have this large document in front of us is dealing with the land use plan map, which has to do with encouraging all kinds of reinvestment and redevelopment at much higher intensities that would exist today. And that's the communities, if we adopt this thing, that's the sort of stated community desire. It seems to almost contradict, you know, basically what our infrastructure can support. Right. So I don't know if planning has any other thoughts as to what we do with this. Do we just push it on to the assembly and then they deal with it, and then we just wait for the first couple of public or private projects to get hung up and then deal with the aftermath?
Thanks for asking. I'll just be fairly brief, but my experience started in the 1980s with the EPA in Idaho doing this kind of integrated watershed analysis with rudimentary GIS technology, and even prior to GIS technology. So all along, states and counties all over the country integrated their land use planning. That was the number one thing you learned in school, is to integrate your land use planning, even out in rural northern Idaho where grizzly bears and everything else exists. We were integrating land use and watershed planning. And actually watershed planning was further along. We didn't have zoning, we didn't have any of those things. We just said it's probably going to be a good idea if we understand the capacity of our watershed and use some basic rules of thumb for the development of those watersheds. So how much development can any specific watershed take before you start blowing things out because you have the development in the watershed? So there's some basic rules of thumb that were out there. Now, they're all changed since the 80s because of so much more science being involved in the process, but that has evolved. In my career, I then went to WIRA 1, Watershed Resource Inventory Area 1, and worked as a technical land use guy with all the scientists and the engineering community, and that's Bellingham, basically. So what they did was probably the most advanced system in the United States at that time, pouring in about $60 million, $70 million into GIS so that we knew where every pipe was in the area. We understood what our fisheries issues were, and we related it back to land use. So how did they do that? They then they have your land use map that you put together, but they then did overlays for watershed purposes on that. And they integrated land use decision making with watershed goals and objectives, working with utility groups, and they had a big team that did that. But essentially, we would work together with them before we made big investments. And I love what they told you is, you know, a little project or a big project with a little watershed, or I mean, that was kind of the basis of it. But we just used a lot more science to describe that, and had a lot more data. So it's all those basic investments that we will do because Alaska hasn't got to that point yet. So it's like, feels a lot more like Idaho in the 80s, and that's fine, you know, but we're advancing. So, you know, where are we today? I would follow the recommendations that they brought. If you wanted to do, and then, you know, the whole process that you brought up a great point. You've got to have transparency. You have to bring everybody in the community along. And that was, in WIRA 1, we really, really tried to do that down in Bellingham. So try not to leave anybody behind because it's a big investment. And what the big objectives there were water quality for drinking water was really the big objective in that particular area. But the secondary objective was fish. So making sure that you're protecting fish. But it's different by watershed areas. So, I mean, that's my experience saying that eventually we'll have these integrated. And eventually you'll see the importance of why the Planning Commission needs to be that body, because just as the gentleman came up today, he's going, hey, this is going to have a big impact on the development community, and he needs a body that he can go that's looking broadly at both the integration, the costs, and giving the assembly some feedback. So eventually it will make more sense as we start bringing more data to bear. As we do the stormwater plan, you'll see the bigger picture coming into focus better. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm just again trying to figure out what additional recommendations we can provide that help move us. I think I fear the same decisions that Brian is fearing when you come in with a development project and you have what you believe are limited options, and those options are costly, and you're already dealing with something that is challenging to make it go, and you're putting expenses in something that nobody sees, nobody values. They don't pay for that, right? None of us want to pay for any of this stuff, right? That's the reality. If we did, we'd have a stormwater utility, and we would all gladly pay a couple of mill rates to support this basic function that government can provide. So anyhow, all right, enough. Let's get on with it. I'm sure Brandon wants to go. Anything else for staff here this evening before we put an action in front of ourselves?
Could I make one more point of clarification? I'm sorry. One thing I just wanted to clarify in relation to the downstream impacts that we talked about quite a bit. The current requirements today, as they exist today, are that you have to do the analysis and you are allowed to increase the flow rate off of site by 5%. That's what's in place today. So remember, too, that what we're proposing gives them a second option, which says if you can increase the flow by 0%, which means you're going to have to do some on-site detention, you're going to have to slow your water down and meter it out at a rate that the downstream system is currently seeing, right? If you do that, you don't have to actually look downstream. So the downstream capacity issues become the city's problem and not the developer's problem if they can meter the water out at a rate similar to what it's going today. I just wanted to clarify.
So it's good clarification, but like in most cities, right? aren't you assuming that your city's system can handle some percentage?
Some percentage, yes. A lot of cities incorporate detention as a regular thing. Some of the feedback we've gotten from people that design for the big box stores here in town, that they have sort of cookie cutter designs because they've done them all over, they were very unsurprised at doing some type of underground detention system because they've done them everywhere else, and they're
But
very
they also
used
have
to
a
it.
huge amount of land, and they're making a huge amount of impact. Like, if it's obvious that they're creating a ton of impervious surface, right? But they also have all this. That parking lot can be one giant retention basin if they want it to be, right?
Right.
It's the smaller developments that are the ones that just they don't have the space. Mr. Strike.
Yeah. If I heard you correct, when they came up here, they were expecting to have to do it. They found they didn't have to do it. Is that correct?
Perhaps, not to my knowledge. I was speaking about ones that they've already done these types of systems many times, so they were unsurprised. Yeah.
They were surprised that. What were they surprised about
They
here in
were
Anchorage?
not surprised by needing to do it because currently we already have detention
That's right.
requirements. Even if we don't actually incorporate this manual, there is already detention requirements in place. So I use that as an example because they do have a huge impact and because they almost never can show keeping it within 5%. Yeah.
See, my experience has been they're used to doing it down south. They came up here and found out they didn't have to do it. A lot of the original box stores did nothing, and they were ecstatic.
That's interesting.
Especially in the area of erosion sediment control.
Yes.
And yeah, there's lots of.
We're way behind lower 48 in that regard.
Commissioner Looney.
And that's my understanding too. As far as I've heard that that's why I definitely support the concepts in this whole. I may sound like I'm not supporting them, but I definitely support them. But for quite a few years in Seattle, developers, Wendy's hamburgers would have to go through all kinds of hoops and do all on-site detention, and it's been the standard for quite a while. We're just catching up. That's really what this is doing, I think. So it's not that out of order. The green concepts and detention, and maintaining your discharge to what it was prior to development kind of stage. So those are standard concepts, I think. So we're catching up.
The newest catchphrase is green.
Yes.
Ms. Bailey.
I think one of the things that a lot of us are struggling about is that in some ways this seems a little premature. We don't even have a stormwater master plan for Anchorage. We don't have those systems up yet. And so in some ways it seems like this is just too early. And I understand some of those concerns, but really my concern is that we're too far behind and we need to start catching up in some way. And this is one way that we're starting to catch up with those rules. And I think you guys have done a great job in getting feedback. I think I am not the first one here to admit that this one is out of my comfort range in technical abilities, but on the whole, it seems like what you've created is a plan that's easier to interpret, easier to review. It's more flexible. It allows for more alternatives, and it does all of that while also having this goal of enhancing watershed health. And that's something that I think our city has been highly lacking for a long time. And if we just continue to push this off, we're always going to be pushing this off. So I'm just excited that we have something out there that's finally starting to curb some of those problems. And I think I'm not quite sure how to progress, but
No, and I don't disagree with you. But what we're doing here is passing regulation. We're not committing to fixing the problem, and that's my concern with it. Right? It's just like everything else. And so we're going to have a recommendation here in a second. I think that recommendation ought to contain some very strong additional recommendations about whether it's understanding stormwater master plans and advancing a stormwater utility that has the ability to fund capital projects within a municipal system. And I think that those deficiencies cannot be borne solely on the backs of private development. And so I'd like to see some recommendations along those lines. I'd like to see some recommendations. I don't think any change should come back here. You know, I think we should come up with some recommendation that has some sort of streamlined process. It doesn't make sense to always, but maybe, as was suggested, maybe there's an annual report that sort of summarizes those things. I'm not sure. And then I think the other one that sort of sticks with me is still this, we really don't fully understand what the costs of some of these green infrastructure fixes are, and how that would impact your general road project, how that would, I mean, I know how much it costs to put in a rain garden. It's no big deal, right? That's not a big deal. But some of this other stuff is a big deal. You know, how long does pervious surfaces, pavement hold up in our winter? You know, all of that kind of stuff. I don't know. So those are the things that I guess from my perspective, since I'm not going to be making the motion, that I would ask that, you know, that I've heard here this evening, and I know you all have heard some other ones, but I think at this point we're probably getting to the point where we need to make a decision and go home. So any final questions? And if we come up with something, we can call these two back up if we're getting too far afield. But otherwise, I'm going to formally close the public hearing. And can I get a motion? This is going to be a brave soul that takes this one, man. And someone can just lay out the first one, and someone could amend to have an additional recommendation. You know, it could be just the basic motion to recommend approval of Chapter 2, and then some others can amend. Mr. Looney, you are a brave soul at your first meeting. Go for it.
Actually, here we go. It's my first motion. So, in case 2017-0030, I move that we approve the update to the 2016 Chapter 2 municipal design criteria with, as far as the conditions, that's the hard part. But
you could leave it there, and you can add additional amendments if you'd like, or you can try to add them right now. It's totally your call.
No, one thing I'd like to mention is the one you brought up for a second ago, was the watershed master plan. Not that it needs to be part of this document, but if we can somehow encourage that development through any of our actions here.
So here's how I would recommend, and just bear with me for a second, Lori. So this is just our action here is a recommendation. So we are recommending that the Assembly consider that they adopt this as part of Title 21. We can also make any other recommendations, right? And those recommendations don't have to be contingent on it. They can just be sort of voiced as strong recommendations. But those recommendations are different than findings, right? They are like, we want you to also consider the following, and then a finding could be something else. So
that works great as far as the recommendation to develop the watershed master plan. That can go along with it then.
So the motion is to recommend the adoption of the Municipal Design Criteria Chapter 2 on drainage, and an additional recommendation to develop a municipal stormwater management plan. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Strike.
Can I maybe possibly add something?
I'm going to go to Mr. Strike first, and then I'll come to you for sure.
If I understand the original motion and its accompanying amendment, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but would a memorandum or some other form of attachment from this body for the clarifications as discussed by the chair suffice for the attachment as this moves forward for approval at the Assembly? And I guess where I'm going for that is, I'm wondering if we tabled this motion for a period of time such that this body, in its collective stance, came up with a one-page clarity statement to accompany rather than as a body. I mean, this moves forward to the Assembly, yet we want to have, I think what you're looking for to incorporate in, as in the amendment, may be beyond just the amendment phase, but you're actually looking at a clarity statement of this body as it moves forward.
Well, it's our collective recommendation. It's not my recommendation. I think my only point would be that I think that nothing gets people's attention like something moving towards assembly adoption. And the longer something stays here, it stays here. It sort of languishes. So I feel like we have enough on our plates to move this thing along. But if there's some significant recommendations that we attach them in the main resolution, and I'm sure you'll be given ample opportunity to participate on some committee at the assembly level if you want another bite at it. But I don't want to hold this one here because I don't believe we hold the technical information that's needed to do.
I was just seeking to see if there's any additional clarity, so I will stand by my second.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Spring.
Well, to address Commissioner Strike's comment, I think when we get the resolution, we can make sure the findings reflect our discussion. I mean, that's what the real key is. It's we don't need a paper, I don't think necessarily, but we can elaborate on the findings, and I think we laid the basis for them pretty well in our discussions.
Yeah, I'd like to hear him again as we're here. But
we see the resolution. I think I would recommend that commissioners take a look at it and elaborate on it.
Then
flesh it out.
With that in mind, can we get a commitment from this body that we will diligently review that resolution for that purpose?
yeah, I mean, and just so someone needs to remember to pull it.
Let's
and
not
go
see it
through
rubber
it.
stamped.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Yep, that's fine. So right now are those the only the recommendation is to adopt and then consider a stormwater utility system, and I'll just throw is there anything out there about process for change of how changes would be reviewed, whether formally or informally? Is there anything out there about understanding costs and best practices in Anchorage? And is there anything out there about a stormwater utility, which is different than a master plan because it actually is the mechanism by which we can actually pay for some of this stuff? So, Ms. Bailey.
I have two amendments I'd like to offer. I'd like to offer them individually. My first amendment would to move this forward and have there be a consideration of an advisory board for review that ideally would incorporate the municipality's engineer as well as both public and private individuals, and then getting a yearly update on those changes.
So thank you for your motion, Ms. Bailey. And the purpose of the advisory board is for changes to the content of the chapter, not for review of specific projects.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Commissioner Looney. Any further discussion, or do you want to speak further?
I'll speak further. I think there was not a whole bunch of clarity onto who would be reviewing these changes when they went through. And I also think there's an understanding that our body is not necessarily the one with the expertise to make those immediate changes, so that a separate body might be the ones recommending them. Also understanding the fact that we don't want a separate body acting on behalf of the city, and so having some sort of review of that would also be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Mr. Looney.
And I'm not really sure the answer to this, but is there a board or commission that deals? I know there's one for water and wastewater already. Is there one that deals with drainage or more drainage specific?
There's not a board. You all have you have the advisory committee that you put together to look at this chapter.
For that project. Yeah.
That's for that purpose. And I think, I don't want to put words in Ms. Bailey's mouth, but the motion was that group was constituted to write this thing, and we're talking about some ongoing group that can hear changes potentially. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And my only, I guess, comment might be if we're going to bother gathering this team of people, maybe they could also review the other chapters. Or do you think, is that even feasible, you think? Is there enough on their plate to just be the...
Yeah, no, I think it's not a bad, I think this is going to come up as these other chapters go forward, because now we're codifying things that are technically always been seen as, you know, technical engineering stuff, right? So I don't know that it's the same group, but it could be. I think that it's well said that it's for consideration. It's not a done deal. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I'd just like some clarification on the amendment, whether or not it includes not only review of potential bugs and problem areas, but also cost of the green infrastructure requirements.
So if I may, I mean, that's more about an individual project, and what I would, right, rather like someone comes forward with a project specifically, not, hey, I want to change, you know, this section in here.
Well, then I misunderstood. I thought the committee was going to look at the reviews and amendments, right?
Yeah,
to the
up here.
Right. So at the time they meet, I don't know what your schedule for this committee would be, but they would also, one of their duties would be to review cost and report back on cost of green infrastructure.
Yeah, I don't know that you want to put that on the committee, but you could put it out there somehow, right? That just somehow, whether it's staff analysis or whatever else. I'm open. It's up to Ms. Bailey if she wants to accept that as a clarification.
I think at this point I want to leave it to textual changes.
Okay. Any objection to the motion to amend proposed by Ms. Bailey? So hearing none, that motion is approved. We're back to the main motion. Ms. Bailey, you said you had an additional one.
Yes, I would also like there to be considered a stormwater utility that is looked at so that there can be financing for this as well.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Spring. Ms. Bailey, go ahead.
Kind of to explain this is we have a completely outdated system, and if we implement all these requirements without any way to pay for it, none of this will actually get done.
Thank you. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get this in. I didn't get this in before, but that committee, the review, the technical edits, what's your opinion regarding our role in that and future amendments? It seems like it's clear that we've done our duty here, and possibly in the future, in order to expedite amendments and make the process work, that we don't really need to be involved in it.
That's how I understood the motion. Was that your intent?
Okay.
Yeah. So back to this motion at hand, Mr. Walker.
So I guess I'd like to clarify this stormwater utility revision. This is a recommendation as we're approving this with that as a recommendation. Is that accurate?
That was my intention.
Okay. And do you have some more specific language? You mentioned a utility. Are we recommending that they research it or explore it or create
I'm open to a friendly amendment, but that's all I have to offer this time.
All right.
And if I may, I mean, I think that you don't even, if you don't want to call it a utility, because that freaks people out. But the idea is the municipality has very limited resources and tools with which to implement this. I know a lot of this is about green infrastructure, but we also had a big, long conversation about the pipe infrastructure is deficient, right, for where we are today, let alone where we want to get to. And so there's a real, you're not going to the state anymore and just saying, give me a big old grant, right? I mean, so where's it going to come from? And so I think whether it's a utility or some other mechanism to be able to implement and fund or finance improvements to our stormwater facility. Mr. Looney.
I'm pretty sure that this topic was brought up quite a bit in a recent study that was done in the Hillside area for Hillside Drainage Plan, I think, and they recognize the fact that there's quite a few needs for improvement in the whole South Anchorage, and so they they brought up this whole concept about a essentially almost like a ARDSA type area where people would be essentially taxed so that so these improvements could be done throughout that part of the
right.
Well, this will not be a popular topic when we talk about tax, but essentially what we're talking about is a way to look at a citywide basis of the needs for the whole drainage infrastructure. That's kind of like where we're heading right now.
That's right, because in the absence, I mean, one of my findings to this, and the reason I would support this amendment, is that in the absence of that, everything falls disproportionately on new development. Yet we're all putting water into the system, right? Whether we have an old home or a new property, an old property, or a Walmart or a gas station. Mr. Strike.
I guess I would caution that we don't get too outside our purview. We seem to be getting, and I'd be concerned, well, I don't disagree. Let's make sure this is the Planning and Zoning Commission. And let's make sure that we keep within the context of our roles and responsibilities. You know, I'm hearing word about taxing and cost and.
See, you had to put the word out there. If you didn't put the word out there, no one.
So that's my concern. I think we need to back up just a half a notch here and make sure that we stay within a swim lane.
If you're increasing the standards, if you're increasing the requirements, if you're acknowledging that we have a deficient system, I don't see how it's not related to what we're adopting here today. And if we're not considering these things from a bigger picture standpoint, then and it's not us, who is it? Who's bringing it up? We're not saying you have to do, I don't think our intent is to say you have to do this to adopt this, but it's if you adopt this, we're creating downstream effects through our permitting process, right?
And I think it's fair that we raise the concern to the body that's going to vote on this.
Yeah, however you want to phrase it. I mean, it's like they're going to take it or leave it ultimately, right?
Right.
Mr. Walker, I'm not letting you go. What you got? No, you're good. Okay.
I was going to say something to Mr. Strike's comments, but I feel like we're heading in the same direction.
You think so? Okay. Given that, can we vote on this amendment? Thanks, Mr. Strike, for coming along with us. Anybody else? Any other recommendations? We're back to the main motion as amended. You can speak to the main motion. If we vote on the main motion, I would like some additional findings afterwards, or you can say them now. If no one pops up in the queue, we'll call the vote on the main motion. That passes. After all that, you were going to vote it down? That is approved. Are there any findings, please? I'm not letting anybody go until we come up with a few. Mr. Walker.
Well, I think we found that the municipality is woefully under positioned to receive this revision, and that we really do need some mechanism, whether it's limited stormwater maintenance areas or some sort of utility, but at the very least we need to dedicate some resources to cataloging our stormwater systems and creating a stormwater master plan of some sort, and in order to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Spring.
Oh, that was very well said, I thought. Yeah, I think the proposed regulations go hand in hand with creating a way to implement them. And one of those ways is to create a database with up-to-date information on the capacity of the stormwater system. And otherwise, it's just all the modeling and all the engineering expertise in the world isn't going to help you because you don't have the information. The stormwater utility is another part of the implementation, I think, to take care of the problems that we uncover with this new information, and even to create the master plan itself of this utility be very useful. And I'd just like to compliment the staff also on the job that they've done. I thought very complex document, and you must be very, very smart to do that. Something that Trump would say, I think. But thank you very much.
Ms. Bailey.
First off, I want to recommend the process that this went through. They incorporated many different perspectives and incorporated people with environmental backgrounds, incorporated people with stormwater backgrounds, and incorporated private developers. It incorporated public developers. So from that perspective, it really did come from gathering perspectives of the entire community. And so I think it took a very good step in creating something that will make Anchorage a better place. In that regard, I think it takes a step forward to correct what is really an unacceptable stormwater and drainage system that we currently have. And we are now moving a step forward. And I believe also that with our recommendations, we're trying to incorporate a review process that corrects deficiencies, which puts the proper people in the perspective of reviewing those deficiencies or corrections as they may come along. And so I think, again, this is helping the process further down the road, and so we are making a step forward.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Mr. Looney.
Yes. I find that the Watershed Management Group did a great job. You know, we talked earlier about taking these 4 kind of mixed up documents and really making them into easier to follow and easier to review. And I think that, of course, we realize, I find that the compliance with the MPDES permit is the thing that's kind of out there right now. We're already late on it, so we've got to do something, and this is definitely a great step forward. I know that we had quite a bit of debate today, probably more technical stuff than we even needed to, because it's what we really care about is we're just going to catch up to where we need to be, and we realize that we may have been using some numbers or like some rain events that were too small, and who cares about that stuff? All we care about, we're going to catch up, and it's going to be more accurate. The thing that did come up here today is just the fact that the cost. There will be a cost. Things are going to be different, and we'll just see where that goes.
Thank you, Mr. Looney, and welcome to the commission. That was well said. Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you. It's important to remember that as Title 21, the passing of Title 21 resulted in a number of unintended consequences. As a body, both at the municipal and this commission, we treated it as a living document to the extent that we addressed those areas proactively. And we've had issues and fixes come before the body or before the appropriate parties fairly quickly. And so I guess I would encourage that as unintended consequences do come forth, that we proactively address those as appropriate. Thank you.
Well said. I don't think I have anything else to add. Well done. Thank you both for your time. And anyone care to have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Mr. Walker. Seconded by Ms. Bailey. Anyone object? Yeah, you want to speak to your motion?
Yes. Actually, I just wanted to say that I was really discouraged to hear that Commissioner Strike has been rubber stamping things all along. So.
We are adjourned.